Chapter 2355. This chaos tribulation lightning should be the last tribulation lightning. Yet now, someone was actually transferring power to the primal chaos tribulation lightning. This had broken the rules since time immemorial. Someone was actually controlling the tribulation. The person controlling the tribulation was determined to kill Chu Fengyan today. He didn't hesitate to transfer power to the tribulation lightning from a distant place. With the continuous transfer of power, the tribulation lightning recovered all the power it had consumed, even surpassing when it had first formed. Moreover, the tribulation lightning's power continued to grow, as if there was no upper limit. If this tribulation lightning continues to grow, I'll die without a doubt. I must find out who is transferring power to him. Chu Fengyan's expression was grim. If the tribulation lightning continued to grow, Chu Fengyan would no longer have any hope of resisting it. He'd already used all his trump cards, even going as far as to forcibly break through to the 5th level of the immortal true body, just to barely resist the tribulation lightning. But if the tribulation lightning's power continued to grow, Chu Fengyan would truly be doomed. His top priority was to find out the source of the tribulation lightning's power. Tianlong, Chu Fengyan roared, channeling the power of primogenitor Tianlong and looking at the surrounding space. The tribulation lightning's source couldn't have come for no reason. It must have come from somewhere. In the blink of an eye, Chu Fengyan saw the layers of space around him clearly. However, there were so many layers that he couldn't explore them all at once. There were more than one layer of space. For example, the space of the 9 regions was composed of many layers. In fact, there were hundreds of layers. This was the star hole, the place where 2 universes had collided. Layers of space that had been crushed by the 2 universes floated in the hole. Chu Fengyan looked around and saw almost 1,000 layers of space. Chu Fengyan had to find the source of the tribulation lightning's power. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack, but Chu Fengyan had no other choice. Only by cutting off the source of the tribulation lightning's power would he have a chance of defeating it. Chu Fengyan's spiritual sense was pushed to the extreme. It swept through dozens of layers of space in an instant. However, this was just a drop in the ocean of thousands of layers of complex space. As Chu Fengyan investigated, he also had to deal with the bombardment of the chaos tribulation lightning. As the chaos lightning grew stronger and stronger, it was no longer as easy for Chu Fengyan to deal with it as it was before. Wielding the Taichu sword was extremely taxing for Chu Fengyan in the first place. Even with the recovery of his divine pulse, Chu Fengyan's power was about to run out. This was even after Chu Fengyan had consumed countless immortal pills to recover his strength. If this continued, Chu Fengyan might not be able to find the source of the chaos tribulation lightning. Chu Fengyan's power would be exhausted first. Anxiety appeared on Chu Fengyan's face. He, who had always been calm and composed, was starting to get anxious. The danger of the celestial tribulation, this time, was far beyond Chu Fengyan's expectations. Even though Chu Fengyan had made so many preparations, he still fell into danger. Rumble. Chaos to devour. The tribulation lightning struck down once again. Holding the Taichu sword, Chu Fengyan resisted the might of the sword, but he was still forced to retreat. Chu Fengyan's power was almost exhausted. It was difficult for him to resist the bombardment of the chaos lightning. Is it not done yet? While Chu Fengyan fought the tribulation lightning, he was also waiting for his immortal true body to completely transform. The 129,600 immortal crystals had transformed into 129,600 immortal crystals. There were only 600 crystals left that hadn't transformed. These 600 immortal crystals seemed to be a threshold. These 600 immortal crystals had already devoured several times the power of the other crystals, but they still hadn't transformed. It seemed that this threshold was incomparably difficult to cross. Chu Fengyan had already tossed all the wondrous items he'd obtained from his spatial ring to his immortal true body. As long as it was something that could be devoured and refined by the immortal crystal, it would be devoured by the immortal crystal. At this point, Chu Fengyan couldn't care less about the value of these wondrous items. Once he died, it wouldn't matter how many things he left behind. Just as the immortal crystal devoured all of Chu Fengmian's wondrous items to the last drop, the last 600 immortal crystals finally began to transform. One by one, the immortal crystals condensed meridian patterns similar to those of a human body. In the end, all 600 immortal crystals transformed. Rumble. The moment all 129,600 immortal crystals transformed, Chu Fengmian's power reached a whole new level. Chu Fengmian's immortal true body had finally ascended to the 5th level. His originally extremely weak strength was instantly restored. Holding the Tai Chu sword in hand, he suddenly slashed at the chaotic tribulation lightning, shattering the bolts of lightning in an instant. At the same time, Chu Fengmian also felt that his power was endless. Even activating the Tai Chu sword didn't consume much of his power. This is Rumble. Another cold harumph suddenly echoed within the chaos tribulation lightning. The voice that rang out this time was much clearer than the previous time. Even Chu Fengmian could hear the anger in the voice. As expected, the tribulation has been controlled by someone. That's why it can erupt with such terrifying power. Chu Fengmian's power, after transcending the great tribulation of the Empyrean realm, had already exceeded the normal range. Since ancient times, some monstrous geniuses had to face the dangers of the heavenly tribulation when they transcended their tribulations. Compared to ordinary warriors, there was a limit. At most, it was about 100 times the danger of the heavenly tribulation. Almost all geniuses since ancient times had been at this level. However, the great tribulation of the Empyrean realm that Chu Fengmian was facing now was tens of thousands of times more powerful than an ordinary one. It had far surpassed the limit. Now, following the angry roar, Chu Fengmian could clearly sense that the tribulation lightning's power was still rising steadily. Someone is transferring power to the tribulation lightning. Elder Fan suddenly exclaimed. The sudden increase in the tribulation lightning's power took him by surprise. The tribulation's power had always been constant. Once the tribulation cloud's power disappeared, the tribulation would end. In order to condense the tribulation lightning, all of the tribulation cloud's power had been consumed. Chapter 2356. The ascension of the immortal true body to the 5th level brought Chu Fengmian a qualitative leap. The power that Chu Fengmian lacked the most in the fight against the chaos tribulation lightning was now completely made up for. Chu Fengmian held the Tai Chu sword in his hand. This time, he didn't have to worry about the consumption of power when he activated the blade. Chu Fengmian's power was 100 times stronger than before, and he displayed his sword skills without restraint. Chu Fengmian's blade flashed, and suddenly dozens of sword skills burst out. If Chu Fengmian had unleashed dozens of sword skills in the past, his spiritual power would have been completely drained. But now, Chu Fengmian could use dozens of sword skills with ease. He could even mobilize his spiritual consciousness to scan the surrounding space the moment he attacked. The dozens of sword skills bombarded down, firmly suppressing the power of the chaos tribulation lightning. This also allowed Chu Fengmian to free himself and search the surrounding space for the source of the chaos tribulation lightning. Chu Fengmian's figure flashed and directly escaped into the depths of the void. He fully unfolded his spiritual consciousness and explored all the layers of space. Just when Chu Fengmian had explored hundreds of layers of space in succession, a sudden force caught his attention. This force was hidden in the gap between the two layers of space, and ordinary people wouldn't be able to detect it. Only when Chu Fengmian was very close did he discover this power. His eyes turned cold. Suddenly, a thought passed through his mind. A couple of huge dragon claws were formed above his head and suddenly clawed forward. Rumble. The moment the dragon claws clawed at it, the force suddenly burst out and revealed its true form from the hidden space. Only then did Chu Fengmian see that it was a spatial tunnel. This spatial tunnel was connected to the chaos tribulation lightning, and the source of the chaos tribulation lightning's power was this spatial tunnel. The other end of the spatial tunnel extended to the 3 sacred realms, but because it was too far away, Chu Fengmian couldn't detect who was at the other end of the spatial tunnel, even if he concentrated all his spiritual consciousness. However, this spatial tunnel extended from at least tens of millions of miles away. Such means Chu Fengmian's face was incomparably gloomy. This kind of method was already beyond the scope of what Chu Fengmian could deal with right now. Not even the celestial sage, who was stronger than Chu Fengmian, could have such means. The laws of heaven and earth in the three sacred domains were incomparably strong. To open up a spatial passageway thousands of miles away from the three sacred domains was a method that was simply shocking. Only an immortal venerable or even invincible immortal emperor could do something like this. Chu Fengmian didn't expect that he would be targeted and devoured by an expert of this level. However, this person was extremely cautious when he attacked. It was as if he did not want to reveal his identity. Otherwise, there would be no need for him to use the primal chaos tribulation lightning to kill Chu Fengmian. If he had attacked directly, it would have been even more difficult for Chu Fengmian to resist. Let's sever this spatial tunnel first. Chu Fengmian was as calm as ever. Even though he knew that he was being targeted, it would be better for him to deal with the tribulation lightning first before doing anything else. Once Chu Fengmian stepped into the celestial realm, his strength would advance by leaps and bounds. At that time, Chu Fengmian would be able to contend with a real expert. The current power of the primal chaos tribulation lightning came from this spatial tunnel. Once the spatial tunnel was severed, the tribulation lightning would lose its source of power. After finding the spatial tunnel, Chu Fengmian didn't need to use any other means. He could directly break it with brute force. The sword in his hand flashed and slashed fiercely at the spatial tunnel. This spatial tunnel was hidden very deeply. It was because such spatial tunnels were usually very fragile that they were deliberately hidden. Chu Fengmian slashed out with his sword. A sword chi slashed down, causing the spatial tunnel to tremble violently. "Brat, you deserve to die." Calm. An angry roar was heard from the spatial tunnel. It was the same voice that Chu Fengmian heard from the primal chaos tribulation lightning. The person who opened the spatial tunnel was indeed the one who controlled the heavenly tribulation. Following the angry roar, more power burst out from the spatial tunnel. It seemed to envelop Chu Fengmian's body and completely destroy him. However, Chu Fengmian wasn't afraid at all. He slashed down with his sword again. In an instant, Chu Fengmian had activated the Tai Chu sword more than 100 times. Crack. Over 100 sword chi slashed at one spot at the same time. Finally, the spatial tunnel couldn't withstand the sword chi and completely shattered. At the moment when the spatial tunnel shattered, an angry roar was heard. "Brat, don't ever step into the three sacred realms if you dare. The moment you step into the three sacred realms, it will be the day of your death." The angry roar disappeared along with the spatial tunnel that was shattered by the sword chi before it could finish speaking. However, those words were still heard by Chu Fengmian. A bluff. Chu Fengmian's lips curled into a cold smile. After a few exchanges, Chu Fengmian was able to see one thing. Although the person behind the spatial tunnel was extremely powerful, he seemed to be restricted by something and couldn't make a move. Otherwise, given the person's strength, even an attack that spanned millions of miles would be able to seriously injure Chu Fengmian. However, he didn't make a move against Chu Fengmian until the spatial tunnel shattered. It wasn't that he didn't want to, but that he couldn't do it. Therefore, he could only kill Chu Fengmian with a borrowed knife. He was prepared to use the power of the chaos tribulation to kill Chu Fengmian, but in the end, he failed. Since he couldn't make a move, Chu Fengmian didn't fear him no matter how strong he was. It would be fine as long as Chu Fengmian didn't give him the opportunity to kill Chu Fengmian with a borrowed knife. Therefore, Chu Fengmian didn't care about the threat at all. Moreover, Chu Fengmian wasn't the kind of person who would be threatened. If he didn't dare to go to the three sacred realms when he was threatened, how could he be considered a powerhouse and invincible? A truly invincible powerhouse was fearless. No matter how great the threat, they wouldn't be afraid at all. The person behind the scenes has been dealt with. All that's left is the chaos tribulation lightning. Chu Fengmian dealt with the spatial tunnel and cut off the power source of the chaos tribulation lightning. The power of the chaos tribulation lightning began to weaken. Originally, the power of the chaos tribulation lightning should have been completely exhausted. It was just that the spatial tunnel was continuously transmitting power. Now that the spatial tunnel was cut off, the power of the chaos tribulation lightning was no longer a threat to Chu Fengmian. Chu Fengmian's eyes flashed with greed when he looked at the chaos tribulation lightning. Chapter 23:57. I can't let such a force go to waste. Although the chaos tribulation lightning was weak, the power it contained was enough to destroy an immortal. It would have been difficult for Chu Fengmian to deal with it before he attained the immortal real body. It would be a waste to destroy such a great force. The essence of the chaos tribulation lightning was the power of creation. Chu Fengmian's natal sword origin fed on the power of creation. Although the chaos tribulation lightning was strong, it wasn't impossible for Chu Fengmian to devour it. Sky devouring. The heaven-devouring beast shadow behind Chu Fengmian suddenly roared and opened its mouth, swallowing the primal chaos tribulation lightning in one gulp. Crackle. The chaos tribulation lightning fell into Chu Fengmian's body and erupted with power, trying to tear his body apart. However, Chu Fengmian's body was completely different from before. The 129,600 mortal crystals had all evolved to the 5th level, making his body 5 times stronger than before. It could be said that Chu Fengmian's body was tougher than most immortal weapons. No matter how the chaos tribulation lightning exploded, its power was divided and dissolved by the 129,600 immortal crystals. At the same time, Chu Fengmian's natal sword origin, the sword of creation formed by the power of creation, flew out and entered the chaos tribulation lightning to devour it. The power of the chaos tribulation lightning was far above Chu Fengmian's natal sword origin. However, the primal chaos tribulation lightning was suppressed by Chu Fengmian's power all the time. Its power was less than 10%. Although the natal sword origin couldn't devour the primal chaos tribulation lightning in one go, it could devour its power bit by bit. In a few breaths, 1% of the chaos tribulation lightning's power had been devoured by the natal sword origin. Although it wasn't fast, Chu Fengmian wasn't in a hurry. He urged the natal sword origin to devour the power of the chaos tribulation lightning bit by bit. Once the chaos tribulation lightning was completely devoured, it would mean the end of Chu Fengmian's celestial tribulation. At that time, Chu Fengmian could truly step into the celestial realm. Chu Fengmian stood in the middle of the star cavern, focusing all of his attention on urging his natal sword energy to devour the chaos lightning. But at this moment, Chu Fengmian suddenly felt a trace of danger. He immediately came to his senses and abruptly condensed his sword intent. But at this moment, a sword suddenly slashed at Chu Fengmian's back without making a sound. Buzz! The sword was silent. Even Chu Fengmian only reacted when the tip of the sword approached him. Boom! The sword pierced through Chu Fengmian's immortal body's defense and stabbed into his body. Jiu Xian. However, the moment the sword pierced Chu Fengmian's body, Chu Fengmian also fiercely countered with his sword. The power of the stars burst out and immediately turned into a sword chi galaxy, sweeping towards the direction of the sword attack. A figure was immediately drawn into the sword chi galaxy. At this moment, Chu Fengmian suddenly saw that the person who had unleashed the sword was actually a young man. The young man's appearance was extremely ordinary and unremarkable, but there was an extremely terrifying sword intent between his eyebrows. The young man fell into the sword chi galaxy, but he didn't panic. Suddenly, the sword in his hand flashed, and a golden light flickered and turned into a sword edge. With a slash of the sword chi galaxy was torn apart by the sword. Who is this person? Chu Fengmian's expression changed. His sword chi galaxy had actually been broken by this young man so easily. Moreover, Chu Fengmian didn't even notice this young man's sneak attack just now. This was the Star Cavern, where the space was extremely unstable and difficult to detect. But it was almost impossible for ordinary peak immortal kings, or even immortal monarchs, to get close to Chu Fengmian. But this young man avoided all of Chu Fengmian's probing, especially when Chu Fengmian noticed that this young man was only an immortal marquis. He was only an immortal marquis. Along the way, Chu Fengmian had killed countless immortal kings and peak-stage immortal kings. In Chu Fengmian's eyes, immortal marquises were like ants. Even Chu Fengmian wasn't willing to fight against immortal marquises. This time, he suffered a great loss in the hands of an immortal marquis. Chu Fengmian could see that this young man wasn't an ordinary immortal marquis. Like Chu Fengmian, his true strength was far beyond his realm. Chu Fengmian even felt that this young man's strength was stronger than Demon Monarch. His strength had definitely reached the immortal monarch level. And even among the immortal monarchs, he was an extremely tyrannical existence. Apart from Chu Fengmian himself, this was the first time he saw such a terrifying figure. Where did such a person come from? Furthermore, this person came specifically for me. Chu Fengmian's eyes flashed with shock. Demon Monarch was already the most dazzling genius Chu Fengmian had ever seen. But compared to this young man, he was still far behind. One had to know that the lower the realm, the stronger the strength, and the more terrifying the future achievements. An existence that was invincible in the same realm, even if he stepped into the immortal venerable or immortal emperor in the future, would be an incomparably terrifying expert. Such a person would be nurtured as a genius in the 3 great saint domains. Such a person definitely wasn't an unknown person. But Chu Fengmian didn't remember provoking such a person. Who are you? Why did you sneak attack me? Chu Fengmian stared at the young man, as if he wanted to find some clues about this person from him. You don't have a right to know who I am. The young man spoke with an extremely arrogant tone. He sized up Chu Fengmian and slowly said, "To think that there would be someone like you in the lower world. It's a pity that you've bumped into me today. Hand over the supreme sword chi and all of the serendipity on you. If you do, I can consider sparing your life and making you my slave to serve me." The young man's words were arrogant to the extreme, but Chu Fengmian was still able to pick up some clues from his words. The lower realm. These 2 words were not ordinary at all. In Sword Emperor Guan's memory, one of the 3 great saint domains names for the outer realm was the lower realm. This was because in the eyes of many experts in the 3 great saint domains, now that the spatial tunnel was cut off, the power of the chaotic tribulation lightning was no longer a threat to Chu Fengmian. The moment Chu Fengmian looked at the chaotic tribulation lightning, his eyes flashed with greed. Chapter 2358. The young man's title meant that he didn't belong to the extraterritorial starry sky. He was at least an expert from the 3 great sacred domains, or even the 9 domains. Judging from his tone, he was probably a famous genius expert, even in the 3 great sacred domains. However, Chu Fengmian had never been to the 3 great sacred domains. In the Sword Emperor Crown's memory, his understanding of the 3 great sacred domains was still maintained from tens of millions of years ago. The genius experts from tens of millions of years ago had probably fallen under the long river of time. Even if there were still people who could survive, they would definitely be immortal venerables or immortal emperors. They definitely wouldn't be this young man. Chu Fengmian and the 3 great sacred domains didn't have any enmity, but the young man in front of him clearly came for Chu Fengmian. Chu Fengmian observed the young man and suddenly felt a familiar feeling. When he thought of the young man's words just now, Chu Fengmian's eyes suddenly revealed a bit of enlightenment. Supreme Sword Chi? You came for the Supreme Sword Chi? Chu Fengmian felt the existence of Supreme Sword Chi from the young man's body. Supreme Sword Chi had the effect of mutual attraction. Originally, Chu Fengmian didn't notice it, but when a young man stood in front of Chu Fengmian suddenly discovered that there was Supreme Sword Chi on this person's body. Moreover, the power fluctuation of this person's Supreme Sword Chi was even stronger than Chu Fengmian's. There were a total of 3,000 Supreme Sword Chi. Now, Chu Fengmian had a total of 2,815 of them in his hands. Logically speaking, even if the other Supreme Sword Qi were all obtained by others, there would only be 185 left. It was far from being comparable to the Supreme Sword Qi in Chu Fengmian's hands. However, the power emitted from this young man's body, the Supreme Sword Qi that this person controlled, in terms of power, was even devouring. It was even more tyrannical than Chu Fengmian. The Supreme Sword Qi on Chu Fengmian's body seemed to be suppressed under the aura of this young man. It was so illogical, but there was only one possibility. That was this young man's body had the King's Sword Qi, the most powerful among the Supreme Sword Qi. There were 3,000 Supreme Sword Qis. The might of each of the 3,000 Supreme Sword Qis was almost on par. However, the first Supreme Sword Qi was an exception. This Supreme Sword Qi was the leader of the remaining 2,999 Supreme Sword Qis. It was known as the King Sword Qi. It was said that the Supreme Sword formation set up by the Upper Sword Sect was set up with the King's Sword Qi as the core. This King's Sword Qi was the true core of the Supreme Sword formation. Without the King's Sword Qi, even though Chu Fengmian had already mastered 2,815 strands of Supreme Sword Qi, he was still far from being able to unleash the power of the Supreme Sword formation. Chu Fengmian had been searching for this King's Sword Qi, but to no avail. Now it seemed that the King's Sword Qi must have fallen into the hands of this young man. It was precisely because he controlled the King's Sword Qi in his hands that it gave Chu Fengmian such a huge sense of oppression. You're quite a smart person. This makes this exalted feel more and more reluctant to kill you. The young man smiled when he heard Chu Fengmian's words. Kneel down and become a slave. That is your final destination. Follow me, and I will bestow you with unparalleled power. The lower world you came from is merely a remote place. Following me is your best choice. The young man stared at Chu Fengmian. Although his tone was calm, the arrogance in his voice showed that he wasn't afraid at all. When he looked at Chu Fengmian, he didn't see Chu Fengmian as a threat, but as an ant that he could crush at any time. Anger flashed in Chu Fengmian's eyes. Ever since he obtained the inheritance of the Supreme Sword Sect, he had shaken the 9 regions. Even the 7 great sects considered Chu Fengmian a great enemy. However, no one dared to look down on Chu Fengmian. You sure talk big. Let's see what you're capable of. Chu Fengmian stared at the young man and said coldly, I've already killed more than one person from the 3 Saint Realms. Killing you won't make any difference. As soon as the young man arrived, he launched a sneak attack on Chu Fengmian without any explanation. In Chu Fengmian's eyes, the young man was already a dead man. No matter how noble his identity was, he couldn't avoid the death penalty today. It didn't matter who came. For Chu Fengmian, no matter what the other party's identity was, as long as they dared to stand on the opposite side of Chu Fengmian, there would only be one result, to be killed by Chu Fengmian. You're just a frog in a well. Do you think I'm the same as those trash? Hearing Chu Fengmian's words, the young man was so angry that he laughed. It's your honor to be my slave, but you don't know how to cherish it. Very well, it's been a long time since someone dared to disobey me. I haven't fought for a long time. Even an ant from the lower world dares to provoke me. Remember, my name is Young Master Zero Jian. I'm the one who will kill you. As he spoke, the young man suddenly made a move. A golden spirit sword condensed in his palm and slashed at Chu Fengmian. The golden spiritual sword didn't have a physical body, but Chu Fengmian could see that it was a spiritual sword condensed from pure sword intent. With such a sword intent, the young man called Young Master Zero Jian sword attainment was even higher than that of an immortal monarch or even a celestial saint. As soon as he attacked, the sky changed color. Sword light appeared everywhere, containing a murderous aura, slashing at Chu Fengmian from all directions. Young Master Zero Jian's sword intent was fully displayed at this moment. It was a sword of absolute killing. His sword was born to kill. It was ferocious everywhere. Sword intent rushed out from his body, shrouding the entire space with countless sword edges. For a moment, it made people tremble with fear. Although young noble Zero Jian was only an immortal marquis. His strength was at least on par with the Devil Emperor. His attainments in the Sword Dao surpassed the Devil Emperor's attainments in the Martial Dao. The strength he could unleash was even greater than the Devil Emperor's. Sword break. The moment young Master Zero Jian attacked, Chu Fumian also took out the Taichu sword and slashed out. Even Chu Fumian had never seen young Master Zero Jian's Sword Dao. In the 9 domains, there were Sword Daos that made a living by killing people. However, none of those Sword Daos could be compared to young Master Zero Jian's Sword Dao. Young Master Zero Jian's sword technique was profound enough to surpass the immortal Emperor's Sword Dao. The person who created this Sword Dao was not inferior to Chu Fumian in terms of Sword Dao attainment. He was definitely a person who was half a step away from the origin of Sword Dao. Chapter 2359. Chu Fumian originally thought that his attainments in Sword Dao had surpassed the immortal Emperor realm and was the closest to the origin of Sword Dao. However, he didn't expect that the creator of young Master Zero Jian's swordsmanship wasn't inferior to Chu Fumian in terms of Sword Dao. This made Chu Fumian realize that he had been viewing the sky from the bottom of a well. Chu Fumian's Sword Dao attainments were indeed unrivaled in the 9 domains and the extraterrestrial starry sky. However, in the 3 sacred domains, and even in 9 domains, there might be someone who could compete with Chu Fumian in Sword Dao. At the very least, the creator of young Master Zero Jian's swordsmanship was qualified to compete with Chu Fumian in Sword Dao. Young Master Zero Jian's swordsmanship should only be a part of the swordsmanship, but it already surpassed Chu Fumian's immortal Emperor swordsmanship. Yin-yang. Amethyst. The sword in Chu Fumian's hand flashed as he struck out twice in succession, barely clashing with young Master Zero Jian's swordsmanship. The power of young Master Zero Jian's swordsmanship wasn't inferior to Chu Fumian's. Moreover, his strength was superior to Chu Fumian's. This was the first time that Chu Fumian didn't have an absolute advantage in swordsmanship when facing young Master Zero Jian. Not bad. Is this the swordsmanship of the Supreme Sword Sect? It's really extraordinary. Young Master Zero Jian looked at Chu Fumian's swordsmanship and slowly said, "It's true that such an inheritance would be buried in the hands of the lower realm. However, it's only in the hands of me, young Master Zero Jian, that the inheritance of the Upper Sword Sect can be truly displayed. Brat, I'm giving you one last chance. Either you submit or you die." Young Master Zero Jian looked at Chu Fumian indifferently. Although he had fought with Chu Fumian once, young Master Zero Jian still looked at Chu Fumian with contempt. He didn't put Chu Fumian in his eyes. "You talk too much nonsense." Chu Fumian didn't want to waste his breath on young Master Zero Jian. Given Chu Fumian's character, he would rather die than surrender as a slave. Moreover, young Master Zero Jian didn't have the qualifications to make Chu Fumian submit. With a flash of his sword, he once again slashed towards young Noble Zero's sword. Chu Fumian slashed out with the countless swordsmanship he had obtained from the Shang Sword Sect. "You're seeking death." Hearing Chu Feng Mian's refusal, young Noble Zero Jian's eyes flashed with anger. With his status, even in the 3 great holy realms, everyone was respectful to him. No one dared to look down on his majesty. In his eyes, Chu Fumian was just an ant from the lower world. He was not even comparable to his usual servants. He wanted to take Chu Fumian as his servant because he saw that Chu Fumian had some attainments in the way of the sword. In his opinion, this was already a supreme reward for Chu Fumian, yet Chu Fumian actually refused him. "Ignorant ant from the lower realms, I will grant you death." Young Master Zero Jian shouted coldly, and his sword suddenly moved. The sword in his hand changed, and unexpectedly, it became invisible. The sword in his hand had disappeared without a trace. However, Chu Fumian could clearly feel that the sword intent from young Master Zero Jian was still present. Chu Fumian instinctively felt a bit of danger, and his figure suddenly retreated. At the place where Chu Fumian was just standing, a sword edge had already slashed down without anyone noticing. If not for Chu Fumian's quick reaction, he would have been killed by the sword. With young Master Zero Jian's strength, Chu Fengmian's immortal true body could hardly withstand it. If Chu Fengmian was hit by this sword, he would either die or be seriously injured. Even I can't see through this person's swordsmanship. Chu Fengmian frowned. When facing other sword cultivators, Chu Fengmian could see through their swordsmanship in an instant. Therefore, Chu Fengmian had a great advantage when facing sword cultivators. However, in front of young Master Zero Jian, Chu Fengmian's advantage in the way of the sword was infinitely reduced, especially when Chu Fengmian couldn't see the sword trajectory clearly. Although it was called an invisible sword, it was actually a kind of camouflage, but Chu Fengmian couldn't see through it. You're quite capable to be able to dodge this sword. While Chu Fengmian's brows were tightly knitted, young Master Zero Jian's expression was incomparably relaxed. He looked at Chu Fengmian with a somewhat playful expression. I wonder how many more swords you can dodge. Just as young Master Zero Jian spoke, Chu Fengmian instinctively felt a sense of crisis, and his figure hurriedly moved to the left. At the place where Chu Fengmian was just a moment ago, another sword silently slashed down. This time, Chu Fengmian still couldn't see the sword's trajectory clearly. If not for Chu Fengmian's instinctive reaction, he wouldn't have been able to dodge this sword. What's going on with this person's swordsmanship? Why can't I see through it? Chu Fengmian was fully focused, trying to see through the sword's trajectory. But this time, Chu Fengmian still couldn't see through the sword's trajectory. Instead, Chu Fengmian couldn't dodge in time, and his arm was cut by the sword. Fortunately, Chu Fengmian dodged in time, and the sword only tore a small wound on his arm. But for Chu Fengmian, his expression was incomparably dignified. The speed of this sword was much faster than before. It was so fast that Chu Fengmian couldn't dodge it by relying on his instincts. This young Master Zero Jian seemed to be toying with Chu Fengmian, deliberately increasing the speed of his sword bit by bit to kill Chu Fengmian. I, Chu Fengmian, am actually being looked down upon. Chu Fengmian's eyes were somewhat cold. Even when he had just risen, Chu Fengmian had never been looked down upon like this. He had never been toyed with like this. If young Master Zero Jian had used his full strength in the first sword, Chu Fengmian wouldn't have been able to block it, but he was deliberately increasing his strength bit by bit. Moreover, he had surpassed the Demon Emperor's attainments in martial arts, and the strength he displayed was even stronger than the Demon Emperor. Sword break. The moment Zero Jian attacked, Chu Fengmian also took out the Taichu's sword and slashed out. Even Chu Fengmian had never seen Zero Jian's sword Dao. In the 9 domains, there were sword Daos that made a living by killing people. However, none of those sword principles could compare to the sword principle unleashed by the Zero Sword. Zero Jian's sword technique was mysterious enough to surpass the immortal Emperor's sword Dao. The person who created this sword Dao wasn't inferior to Chu Fengmian in terms of sword Dao attainments. He was definitely a figure who was half a step away from the origin of sword Dao. Chapter 2360. More than half of Chu Fengmian's strength was used to suppress the chaos tribulation lightning. Therefore, he was powerless against young Master Zero Jian. Boom! While Chu Fengmian was still pondering, another beam of sword light came slashing at Chu Fengmian. 3 suns blazing sword. Chu Fengmian moved the Taichu sword in his hand, condensing a supreme flame. He suddenly slashed out, creating a sea of fire in front of Chu Fengmian. It collided with the invisible sword. 3 suns blazing sword, the sword technique of the number 1 Sword Emperor. Young Master Zero Jian looked at Chu Fengmian's sword with a hint of surprise in his eyes. Chu Fengmian had mastered the sword technique of the number 1 Sword Emperor and had used it countless times in the 9 domains. However, no one could see the true origin of this sword technique. However, young Master Zero Jian recognized it at a glance. This person's attainment in sword Dao was far beyond those sword techniques in the 9 domains. Young Master Zero Jian's eyes revealed a hint of surprise when he saw Chu Fengmian's 3 suns blazing sword. I didn't expect you to not only inherit the sword technique of the Supreme Sword Sect, but also the sword technique of the number 1 Sword Emperor. You're really lucky. Unfortunately, you met me today. All of your opportunities will belong to me. Young Master Zero Jian swung his sword, and a dazzling sword light burst out, immediately hitting the sea of fire. Suddenly, the sea of fire was shattered by young Master Zero Jian's sword. Another sword technique? Chu Fengmian's eyes suddenly shrunk. Young Master Zero Jian had used a third sword technique in a short period of time. Within a short period of time, young Master Zero Sword had already performed 3 different sword techniques. The first sword technique contained the Tao of Slaughter. It was a sword technique that contained boundless slaughter. The second sword technique was the invisible sword technique. As for the third sword technique, it was a sword technique with extreme power. The profoundness of these 3 sword techniques was completely different. Even the sword Tao they contained could be said to be completely opposite. However, each of the sword techniques displayed by young Master Zero contained incomparably terrifying power. Chu Fengmian had some doubts about young Master Zero Jian's origin. How could he know so many sword techniques? Moreover, each of these sword arts was at least at the Immortal Emperor sword art level. They were definitely created by Immortal Emperor sword arts. An Immortal Emperor sword art was considered a supreme sword art even among the inheritances of the Shang sword school. However, there were only 6 of them in the Shang sword school. But now, young Noble Zero Sword had casually unleashed 3 Immortal Emperor sword arts. Even in the 3 great sacred realms and celestial 9 domains, the Immortal Emperor's sword art was an absolute secret. Only those powerful sects with a long history could possess it. Since young Noble Zero Jian could control 3 Immortal Emperor sword arts, his background must be shocking. However, Chu Fengmian didn't care about the origin of this young Master Zero Jian. As long as he was an enemy of Chu Fengmian, he would kill him no matter what his origin was. Chu Fengmian unleashed countless sword arts to clash with young Noble Zero Sword. Every moment was enough for them to clash dozens of times. Young Noble Zero Sword also unleashed his sword arts to attack Chu Fengmian. However, he didn't use his full strength. He was able to deal with Chu Fengmian's sword arts with ease. The First Sword Emperor's sword art, the Supreme Sword School's sword art, and the Lord of Sword Tao's sword art. Such an opportunity has fallen into the hands of an ant from the lower realm. It's really a waste. Young Noble Zero Sword stared at Chu Fengmian with jealousy in his eyes. Chu Fengmian's Sword Tao inheritance made him extremely jealous. Whether it was the First Sword Emperor, the Lord of Sword Tao, or the Supreme Sword School, all of them were illustrious existences in the history of Sword Tao. Now, their inheritances were inherited by a little guy like Chu Fengmian. Since you don't want to hand it over, I'll suppress you and torture you bit by bit. Let's see how long you can endure. Suddenly, young Master Zero sword flashed, and a sword light soared into the sky. It turned into a huge golden sword and descended from the sky. This huge golden sword contained a suppressive force. It was a suppressive technique. Young Noble Zero Sword finally lost his patience and directly attacked. He wanted to suppress Chu Fengmian once and for all. Asterisk Hong Long Long. Asterisk the power contained in the huge golden sword was completely different from the sword art that young Noble Zero Sword had used before. It was on a completely different level. The power was 10 times stronger. This kind of power was incomparably close to the level of the ancient White Wolf. Young Noble Zero Sword's true strength was actually close to the peak Immortal Monarch realm. As the huge golden sword descended, Chu Fengmian was under great pressure. Chu Fengmian did not expect young Noble Zero Sword to have reached such a level. As the huge golden sword pressed down, Chu Fengmian could feel the power of his bloodline boiling. Chu Fengmian's bloodline power was the bloodline of the 3 great innate divine beasts. Innate divine beasts were fearless even in the face of heaven and earth. The dignity that came from their bloodline would not allow anyone to suppress them. The bloodline of the 3 great innate divine beasts was pushed to the extreme in Chu Fengmian's body. Suddenly, the shadows of the 3 great innate divine beasts, Tianlong, Xianjing, and heaven-devouring beast, soared into the sky from Chu Fengmian's back. The shadows of the three great innate divine beasts looked at the sky and the huge golden sword that was descending. They roared and resisted the huge golden sword with the power of their bloodline. World's suppressing sword. Young Noble Zero's sword was unperturbed when he saw this. He activated the sword edge again, and a surge of sword intent descended and infused into the huge golden sword. The huge golden sword was countless times larger than before. The power contained in it was also far stronger than before. It slowly pressed down. The shadows of the three great innate divine beasts behind Chu Fengmian were crazily squeezed and shrunk under the terrifying suppression. Asterisk Hong Hong Hong. Asterisk even the space around Chu Fengmian began to solidify under the steady stream of suppressive power. The solidified space was tougher than a real immortal item. The solidified space around Chu Fengmian had turned into a huge cage. Chu Fengmian was trapped in the cage. Despite his continuous resistance, he was still suppressed bit by bit. In a few breaths' time, Chu Fengmian's body was compressed to the size of a few centimeters. In front of the huge golden sword, he was incomparably small. He could be completely suppressed by the huge golden sword at any time. It was almost a foregone conclusion that Chu Fengmian was suppressed. But at this moment, Chu Fengmian's body suddenly moved. Chapter 2361. All of a sudden, a shocking sword intent burst out from Chu Fengmian's body. The sword intent soared into the sky and collided with the giant golden sword. Chu Fengmian, who had been retreating under the suppression of the giant golden sword, suddenly launched a counterattack. Chu Fengmian's body recovered in an instant. Chu Fengmian, who had shrunk to a few centimeters under the suppression, suddenly returned to his normal appearance. A demonic aura was emitted from Chu Fengmian's body and shrouded him. Chu Fengmian's body began to grow. He became dozens of meters tall with a pair of wings on his back. His bronze-like skin was burning with red flames. Endless sword intent burst out from Chu Fengmian's body. At this moment, Chu Fengmian's aura was completely different from before. The chaotic tribulation thunder was finally completely devoured by Chu Fengmian's natal sword origin. Chu Fengmian used most of the power to suppress the chaotic tribulation thunder in his body, but at this moment, all of it burst out. He broke out his strongest state. There was even a large amount of power rising from Chu Fengmian's body. Chu Fengmian's body began to sublimate. His realm was officially transforming into the celestial realm. The celestial being tribulation was the greatest threshold for all martial artists. Once one crossed the celestial tribulation and stepped into the celestial realm, the difference between celestial and man would be like ascending to immortality. In countless continents, there were rumors of ascending to immortality. This was the peak that most warriors looked forward to. Now, Chu Fengmian had finally reached this step. He had shed his mortal body and become an immortal. Chu Fengmian had been waiting for this moment for too long. In the Star Cave, Chu Fengmian finally stepped into the celestial realm. Suddenly, Chu Fengmian's body seemed to have turned into a huge vortex. The surrounding power of heaven and earth and spiritual chi of heaven and earth flew towards Chu Fengmian and were madly devoured. Chu Fengmian's power was growing and sublimating almost every moment. A large amount of power of heaven and earth poured into Chu Fengmian's body. Chu Fengmian's internal organs, his divine veins, his body, and the 129,600 mortal crystals all swallowed a large amount of power of heaven and earth. Their power grew rapidly. Young Masterling Jian, I don't care who you are or where you came from. Since you provoked me today, only death awaits you. Chu Fengmian looked at young Noble Zero Jian with boundless killing intent in his eyes. You also have many sword skills that I have never seen before. I won't kill you easily. I'll have the same idea as you. I'll suppress you and torture you until you tell me all your sword skills. You are actually hiding such power? The way young Noble Zero Jian looked at Chu Fengmian changed. His usual indifferent attitude had changed. He was able to tell that Chu Fengmian's strength had definitely increased by tens or even hundreds of times. This sort of transformation was simply inhuman, especially when he saw Chu Fengmian's appearance. It was as if he had seen a ghost. Sorcerer tribe? You're from the sorcerer tribe? How can there be a sorcerer tribe in a place like the lower realm? Moreover, a sorcerer tribe with the bloodline of the ancestral sorcerer tribe? Sorcerer tribe? Chu Fengmian suddenly frowned when he heard this name. However, before Chu Fengmian could continue speaking, young noble Zero Jian's face revealed a bit of ferocity. So what if you're from the sorcerer tribe? This is the Star Cave. No one can detect what's happening here. Those old guys won't know even if I kill you. A sorcerer tribe member has cultivated sword principle to such a level. You must have a bigger secret. Very well. I came to the lower realm this time to look for supreme sword chi. I didn't expect to encounter such a great opportunity. Supreme sword chi. Suppress. Suddenly, the power of young, noble Zero Jian skyrocketed again. He controlled the giant golden sword and suppressed it again. You still want to suppress me? Ridiculous. Chu Fengmian's eyes revealed a bit of coldness. He poured his sword essence into the Tai Chu sword. The sword soared into the sky and collided with the giant golden sword in the air. In the instant of the collision, the enormous golden sword was directly shattered. Chu Fengmian's current strength was countless times stronger than when he was undergoing the Deva Tribulation. After passing the Deva Tribulation, Chu Fengmian didn't know what level his strength had reached. However, Chu Fengmian's current strength was definitely not inferior to young noble Zero Jian's. After the giant golden sword was shattered by Chu Fengmian's sword, Chu Fengmian instantly sent out several sword lights that slashed towards young noble Zero Jian from all directions. Young noble Zero Jian had been suppressing Chu Fengmian all this while, which made Chu Fengmian very angry. Now, it was time for young noble Zero Jian to have a taste of his own medicine. Boom! Chu Fengmian's sword lights flickered again and again, shattering the surrounding space under the sword lights. Chu Fengmian's current strength had finally reached the level where he could break through space. This place was extremely close to the three great saint domains. The space law was almost the complete space law of the three great saint domains. Only the strength of a peak, immortal monarch, was qualified to break through space. Now that Chu Fengmian's sword light could break through space, it meant that the sword light he sent out had the strength of a peak, immortal monarch. Bam! Young noble Zero Jian did not expect the power contained in these sword lights. He originally wanted to casually use his sword to neutralize them, but he found that the power contained in these sword lights was not inferior to his full strength. Due to a moment of carelessness, one of the sword lights directly pierced young noble Zero Jian's back. Although it was stopped 3 inches away from young noble Zero Jian, young noble Zero Jian managed to block it. However, the power that erupted from the sword light still forced young noble Zero Jian to retreat dozens of miles away. His clothes were torn and tattered, making him look extremely miserable. Damn it! Young noble Zero Jian's face was filled with extreme anger, as if he was thoroughly enraged. His eyes were filled with blood-red, killing intent. Suddenly, a sword light flew out from between his eyebrows. This golden light was only 3 inches long, and it turned into a golden spiritual sword. The moment the sword light flew out, Chu Fengmian felt the 2,815 strands of supreme sword chi in his body become restless. They even wanted to fly out and submit to the sword light. King Sword Chi. This sword light was the King Sword Chi of the Supreme Sword Chi. There were a total of 184 sword lights surrounding this King Sword Chi. They were the remaining 184 Supreme Sword Chi. Chapter 2362. 3,000 Supreme Sword Chi had appeared, but they were in the hands of young Master Zero Jian and Chu Fengmian respectively. Chu Fengmian controlled 2,815 Supreme Sword Chi, while the remaining 185 Supreme Sword Chi and the most crucial King Sword Chi were in the hands of young Master Zero Jian. The King Sword Chi was the core of the 3,000 Supreme Sword Chi. The moment young Master Zero Jian activated the King Sword Chi, Chu Fengmian could feel the 2,815 supreme sword qi in his body becoming restless, as if they were attracted by something and wanted to fly out of Chu Fengmian's body to young Master Zero Jian's side. Chu Fengmian's expression suddenly changed. The 3,000 supreme sword qi was a whole entity. It could be said that only the 3,000 supreme sword qi could display the true power of the supreme sword qi. Not a single one of the 3,000 supreme sword qis could be missing. Once the 3,000 supreme sword qis were gathered, the power unleashed would be terrifying to the extreme. According to the records of the Sword Emperor crown, once the 3,000 sword qi were gathered, it could easily kill an immortal saint. Once the formation was set up, it could even contend against an immortal venerable. Now, young Master Zero Jian activated the King's Sword Qi to force all the Supreme Sword Qi out of Chu Fengmian's body for his own use. This was extremely dangerous for Chu Fengmian. If young Master Zero Jian obtained the 3,000 Supreme Sword Qi, it would be almost impossible for Chu Fengmian to escape unscathed. Suppress. In Chu Fengmian's body, the energy of the 129,600 immortal crystals was fully activated, suppressing the restless Supreme Sword Qi. But when Chu Fengmian was distracted to suppress the Supreme Sword Qi, young Master Zero Jian suddenly made his move. His sword flickered continuously, but no sword light could be seen clearly. The invisible sword suddenly slashed towards Chu Fengmian. The purpose of young Master Zero Jian's King Sword Qi was to distract Chu Fengmian from suppressing the Supreme Sword Qi. While Chu Fengmian was distracted, he took the opportunity to kill Chu Fengmian. The power of the invisible sword was countless times stronger than before. However, just as the formless sword approached Chu Fengmian, the tip of Chu Fengmian's sword suddenly moved. The tip of his sword flashed and collided with the sword qi. This sword qi was the invisible sword that young Master Zero Jian had unleashed. Previously, when Chu Fengmian faced the invisible sword, he could only rely on his innate reflex to dodge it. However, this time, Chu Fengmian was able to find the traces of the invisible sword in the void. Chu Fengmian Jian's heavenly immortal realm was an immortal ascension, immortal realm. Once one stepped into the celestial being realm, one could be considered to have truly ascended to immortality. It was a completely different level from the half-step celestial being realm. In terms of mastery of laws, it was also on a completely different level. Fengmian Jian's immortal demon, immortal immortals. The moment he stepped into the celestial realm, Chu Fengmian felt that his control over the surrounding space was far better than before by dozens of times. Chu Fengmian had a panoramic view of the invisible sword that he couldn't see any flaw in. Bam! The moment the two swords collided, young Master Zero Jian's invisible sword was shattered in the air. The invisible sword young Master Zero Jian had unleashed was known for its strangeness. It was impossible to guard against it, but its real power was inferior to many immortal swordsmanship. Now that Chu Fengmian was in control of space, the so-called strangeness of the invisible sword didn't exist in front of Chu Fengmian. Naturally, the invisible sword was vulnerable. Is this all you have? Chu Fengmian's eyes showed some disdain. The mystery of the invisible sword was easily seen through by Chu Fengmian after he stepped into the heavenly, immortal realm. This made Chu Fengmian a little disappointed. He thought that the invisible sword was more mysterious, but he didn't expect that it was just a space Dao swordsmanship. Such a swordsmanship was indeed terrifying when used against martial artists and demon immortals who were weaker than him. However, once the opponent's strength surpassed him, the invisible sword would be meaningless. It was only useful in a sneak attack. However, Chu Fengmian's sword Dao was a supreme great Dao. He wanted to use his sword Dao to crush everything in front of him. This kind of means was useless against him. However, the invisible sword was an immortal emperor-level swordsmanship. Once it could be integrated into the ancient swordsmanship book, it would be helpful to Chu Fengmian's sword Dao. Yu. Young Master Zero Jian's face changed dramatically when he saw Chu Fengmian easily blocked the invisible sword. It was as if he had seen a ghost. Panic flashed in his eyes, which had always been arrogant and confident. It seemed that the situation in front of him had exceeded his expectations. He didn't expect that Chu Fengmian, who was just an ant in the lower world, could really threaten him. His swordsmanship was defeated by Chu Fengmian just like that. Young Master Zero Jian's swordsmanship was indeed at the level of an immortal emperor. However, Chu Fengmian's sword Dao had surpassed a true sword emperor. As for young Master Zero Jian, his sword Dao was nothing in front of Chu Fengmian. Before Chu Fengmian stepped into the celestial realm, young Master Zero Jian could still suppress him due to the gap in their cultivation levels. However, now that Chu Fengmian had stepped into the celestial realm, his strength was no longer inferior to young Master Zero Jian. In terms of sword Dao, Chu Fengmian had surpassed young Master Zero Jian. Young Master Zero Jian's strength was completely suppressed by Chu Fengmian. Sword. Chu Fengmian looked at young Master Zero Jian, and suddenly, his figure flickered. His speed was several times faster than before, and he arrived beside young Master Zero Jian in an instant. Suddenly, Chu Fengmian's sword slashed down. Boom! The power of the sword was far greater than before. As Chu Fengmian slashed out, he felt that the radiance of the primordial sword was even brighter than before. When Chu Fengmian was in the half-step celestial realm, it seemed a little difficult for him to wield the primordial sword. However, after stepping into the celestial realm, he could clearly feel the power of the primordial sword. The sword slashed down, shattering the space. Young Master Zero Jian was pushed into the depths of the void by the might of the sword. His body was constantly shaking. Young Master Zero Jian had already reacted when Chu Fengmian slashed out his sword. He held his spiritual sword in a panic and struck out the sword edge in an attempt to resist. However, the residual power still bombarded his body. Chapter 2363. The power of the swords collided again and again, making it hard for people to see what was happening. Only the explosions caused by the collision of the swords could be heard. Boom! Boom! Chu Fengmian and young Sir Zero's sword were using power and the Tao of the sword to fight each other head-on. The shockwave blasted Chu Fengmian's body. This power was enough to shatter a peak immortal king realm martial artist and demon god into pieces. However, the moment the shockwaves hit Chu Fengmian, they were dispersed by the 129,600 immortal crystals in Chu Fengmian's body. Chu Fengmian transformed into the bronze celestial demon. His towering body, which was dozens of meters tall, stood there without moving at all. He held the Taichu sword in his hand and slashed down in a frenzy. Compared to Chu Fengmian, young Master Zero Jian's side was in a more difficult situation. The shockwaves from the collision slammed into young, noble Zero Jian's body, causing him to be swallowed whole. Eitsu. For a moment, young Master Zero Jian was forced to step back, screaming from time to time. He didn't have a heaven-defying body like Chu Fengmian. Chu Fengmian's immortal true body had reached the 5th level. The strength of his body had reached an unimaginable level. The shockwaves couldn't hurt Chu Fengmian at all. He was even more unscrupulous when he displayed his swordsmanship, not worrying about the backlash of the shockwaves. The situation was reversed in an instant. In addition, after Chu Fengmian's immortal true body reached the 5th level, his meridians had merged with his divine meridians, which strengthened his divine meridians by 100 times. His current strength was extremely strong. When he displayed his sword skills, his immortal energy was like free money, crazily bombarding down. Every move was a full-powered attack. Not even an immortal saint could do such a crazy attack. But Chu Fengmian did it. The continuous bombardment made it harder for young Master Zero Jian to deal with. Time and time again, the shockwaves of the attacks struck young Master Zero Jian's body. Although the shockwaves couldn't harm him at all, young Master Zero Jian's body was still extremely weak. But when hundreds or thousands of shockwaves were added together, it was completely different. Young Noble Zero Jian's face turned pale, and he suddenly vomited a mouthful of blood. Thousands of swords collided with each other, and all the aftershocks bombarded his body. Young Master Zero's sword was unable to suppress the power of the aftershocks. Suddenly, he coughed out a mouthful of blood. Just as young Master Zero Jian was about to give up, Chu Fengmian suddenly made his move. With a thought, he condensed his immortal force and transformed it into an invisible giant hand that slammed down on young Master Zero Jian. Ancient Emperor seizing the art of war. Rumble. This invisible hand directly enveloped young Master Zero Jian's body, and suddenly it grabbed the king's sword chi inside his body and grabbed it with a loud bang. Of the countless treasures on Prince Zero Jian's body, Chu Fengmian was most interested in the king's sword chi. As long as he obtained this king's sword chi, Chu Fengmian would be able to completely control the supreme sword chi. Therefore, Chu Fengmian seized the opportunity and immediately activated the Ancient Emperor's Art of War to directly take the king's sword chi. Ancient Emperor's Art of War. Seeing this invisible giant hand, young Master Zero's sword's face suddenly changed, and his eyes revealed a trace of madness. Want to take away the king's sword chi? Dream on. While speaking, young Master Zero's sword suddenly took out a jade talisman and suddenly crushed it. The moment the jade talisman was taken out, Chu Fengmian's eyes suddenly changed. He could feel a kind of extreme horror from the jade talisman. This kind of power was the most terrifying power Chu Fengmian had ever seen. The moment young Master Zero's sword took out the jade talisman, Chu Fengmian wanted to stop him. However, young Master Zero's sword speed was too fast, and Chu Fengmian did not have the time to stop him. He could only watch helplessly as the jade talisman was crushed. The power contained within the jade talisman suddenly began to condense behind young Master Zero's sword. It gradually transformed into a human figure behind Chu Fengmian. As the human figure condensed, a kind of majestic aura descended. Under this imposing aura, it was as if all the martial artists and demon gods would have to submit. The human figure was incomparably illusory, and no one could see the appearance of the figure behind it. However, his majesty had already descended, and no one could challenge this majesty. Immortal Emperor. This is the incarnation of an immortal emperor. That jade talisman is actually an incarnation personally refined by an immortal emperor. Under the pressure, Chu Fengmian also knew the identity of the figure. It was an immortal emperor. Only an immortal emperor could have such power. Once he descended, all the immortals would submit. Even if it was just an incarnation, the power it contained was still extremely terrifying. Chu Fengmian never imagined that young Master Zero's sword would have a jade talisman that could condense an immortal emperor's incarnation. An immortal emperor's incarnation? An incarnation jade talisman refined by an immortal emperor? How is this possible? What is the origin of this person? Could he be the son of an immortal emperor? Not only Chu Fengmian, but even Elder Fan and Chu Fengmian's mind set in shock. One should know that such an incarnation wasn't something that could be casually refined. Any incarnation that was refined into a jade talisman would have to consume a little bit of their own origin energy. For an immortal emperor, even if it was just a trace of their origin energy, it would take at least thousands of years, or even tens of thousands of years to recover. Moreover, it might affect their advancement to a higher realm. Therefore, the higher the realm of an expert, the more reluctant they were to refine an incarnation jade talisman. In Sword Emperor Guan's memory, even in the Shang Sword sect, the protection for the core disciples was only the incarnation jade talisman refined by immortal venerables. As for the incarnation jade talisman of the immortal emperor level, even the disciples of immortal emperors might not be qualified to obtain it. Only those peerless geniuses that were rarely seen in thousands of years were qualified to make an immortal emperor consume a trace of their origin energy to refine an incarnation jade talisman. An immortal emperor level incarnation jade talisman might not appear in the world, even the three saint domains, for hundreds of thousands of years. Chu Fengmian had already estimated the identity of young Master Zero Sword. But with the appearance of this immortal Emperor Incarnation Jade Talisman, Chu Fengmian's guess about young Master Zero Sword's identity was completely shattered. This person's background was absolutely terrifying to the extreme. At least, there was an immortal emperor behind him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to obtain such an immortal Emperor Incarnation Jade Talisman. Chapter 2364. I've actually provoked such a troublesome character. Chu Fengmian felt that the situation was extremely troublesome. The origin of this young Master Ling Jian was far beyond his expectations. To be able to obtain an immortal Emperor Incarnation Jade Talisman. Obviously, there was an immortal emperor who valued young Master Ling Jian greatly. But today, Chu Fengmian had thoroughly offended young Master Ling Jian. As long as Chu Fengmian was unwilling to give up the supreme sword qi in his hand, young Master Ling Jian would definitely not let him go. Chu Fengmian and young Master Ling Jian would definitely have battle. After all, there was only one master for supreme sword qi. Letting young Master Ling Jian go today was the same as letting a tiger return to the mountain. Thinking of this, Chu Fengmian did not have the slightest hesitation. Even in the face of an immortal emperor's incarnation, Chu Fengmian did not shrink back. He suddenly activated the power of the ancient emperor's art of war. The invisible hand shrouded young Master Ling Jian's body. Suddenly, the king's sword qi in between his eyebrows was forcibly extracted. "Master, save me!" Young Master Ling Jian saw this scene and shouted loudly to the immortal emperor's incarnation. This king's sword qi was a necessary item for him to collect the 3,000 supreme sword qi. If he lost this king's sword qi, there was no way he could contend against Chu Fengmian. Supreme sword qi was related to the great secret of the Supreme Sword Sect. He was unwilling to let Chu Fengmian obtain this king's sword qi. In order to protect this king's sword qi, young Master Ling Jian did not hesitate to activate the immortal Emperor Incarnation Jade Talisman. Each immortal Emperor Incarnation Jade Talisman was a priceless treasure. It was equivalent to an immortal emperor personally taking action. If taken out, it could be exchanged for dozens of immortal tools. Even young Master Ling Jian could only obtain one immortal Emperor Incarnation Jade Talisman. It was impossible for him to obtain a second chance. This immortal Emperor Incarnation Jade Talisman was only used in a life and death crisis. If Chu Fengmian was not about to seize the King's Sword Qi, he would not have used it. "You actually crushed the Jade Talisman? Who is it? Who can force you to this point?" Along with young Master Ling Jian's voice, the figure slowly condensed. The figure's true body seemed to be in a distant space. However, as soon as he opened his mouth, an unparalleled might enveloped the area. Chu Fengmian could feel that his power was being suppressed. Ordinary immortal kings, or even immortal monarchs, would be completely suppressed in front of an immortal emperor, even if it was just an immortal emperor's incarnation. This kind of suppression that came from power was simply impossible to resist. However, Chu Fengmian resisted the suppression of the immortal emperor's aura. His bloodline power was pushed to the extreme. Chu Fengmian wasn't afraid of the immortal emperor's aura. Chu Fengmian was a heaven-defying variant. Even the heavenly Tao wasn't enough to scare him, let alone an immortal emperor. Stripped, Chu Fengmian resisted the pressure and once again used the ancient emperor's art of war to grab young Noble Zero Jian's body. More than half of the King's Sword Qi in young Noble Zero Jian's forehead had been taken out by the ancient emperor's art of war. Seeing that Chu Fengmian could still make a move, young Noble Zero Jian's eyes looked as if he had seen a ghost. Even he would be suffocated by the immortal emperor's aura. But Chu Fengmian didn't seem to be affected at all. For a moment, young Noble Zero Jian forgot to resist. By the time he reacted, the King's Sword Qi had already flown out of young Noble Zero Jian's body. This King's Sword Qi seemed to have followed young Noble Zero Sword for a very long time and contained his imprint. Even when the ancient emperors seized the art of war, the king's sword Qi still resisted the power of the ancient emperor's art of war. This kind of imprint was almost impossible to erase. However, the ancient emperor's art of war was also an invincible secret technique in the ancient era. As long as it was targeted by the ancient emperor's art of war, even if it was an extreme immortal weapon or an immortal emperor's imprint, it wouldn't be able to resist. Chu Fengmian circulated the ancient emperor's art of war. Immediately, a wave of energy turned into a heaven-devouring divine light that drilled into the king's sword Qi and began to devour the imprint left behind by young, noble Zero Jian. Interesting. A little guy can actually ignore this emperor's aura? At this time, the immortal emperor's clone slowly woke up. He opened his eyes and looked at Chu Fengmian. His tone was filled with curiosity as he carefully sized up Chu Fengmian. A heaven and earth variant. In an instant, the immortal emperor's clone spoke. His tone was filled with extreme surprise. Even with his identity as an immortal emperor, he was shocked to the extreme when he saw Chu Fengmian. A heaven and earth variant? A person who has crossed a heaven-defying tribulation? Young noble Zero Jian was also stunned upon hearing this. Chu Fengmian was a heaven and earth variant who had crossed a heaven-defying tribulation and fused with primordial Qi. For most martial artists and demon gods, even if they saw it with their own eyes, they wouldn't be able to tell. Even with young noble Zero Jian's experience, he couldn't tell. However, the immortal emperor's clone saw through Chu Fengmian's deepest secret with a single glance. A heaven and earth variant who defied the heavens. The moment he looked at Chu Fengmian, there were no more secrets on Chu Fengmian. Nothing could escape the eyes of the immortal emperor's incarnation. Chu Fengmian was also aware of all this. Even though he had tried his best to conceal it, he couldn't hide it from the eyes of the immortal emperor's clone. The experience of an immortal emperor was beyond Chu Fengmian's imagination. He actually fused with the origin energy of the three great innate divine beasts. How could there be such a person? How could there be such a heaven-defying existence in the lower realm? The more he saw through Chu Fengmian's opportunity, the more shocked the immortal emperor's clone was. Even with his experience, he was completely stunned. Even in the three great saint domains, there was no existence like Chu Fengmian. Since ancient times, there weren't many geniuses who could compare to Chu Fengmian. Interesting. I didn't expect to meet such a person. Very good. A heaven and earth variant who has fused with the origin energy of the three great innate divine beasts. He has also condensed the shaman true body and reached the 5th level. It's simply a perfect body. The immortal emperor's clone's voice was filled with endless greed. A perfect body. Once I possess this body, it's not impossible for me to cross the heavenly tribulation and step into the sovereign realm in the future. This is an opportunity delivered to my doorstep. Zero Jian, you've given me a great gift this time. Chapter 2365. The immortal emperor's clone looked at Chu Fengmian as if he was looking at a treasure within reach. Some weaker cultivators might not be able to see the value of Chu Fengmian's various opportunities, but the immortal emperor was well aware of what Chu Fengmian's various opportunities would bring him in the future. For example, the primordial force, a worldly variant, couldn't display its true might when one's cultivation level was low. But once one stepped into the immortal venerate realm, or even the immortal emperor realm, this terrifying aspect would be perfectly displayed. The 12 innate divine beasts of the primordial era each possessed the strength to contend against a peak immortal emperor and stand shoulder to shoulder with a ruler. They relied on the primordial force. Not even an immortal emperor could control this power. A cultivator who transcended a heaven-defying tribulation was, in his opinion, the perfect flesh. Once he possessed Chu Fengmian's body, all these opportunities would belong to him. Even the immortal emperor was laughing heartily. Good, good. The perfect body will soon belong to me. If you want to possess my body, you'll have to be qualified first. While the immortal emperor's clone was laughing, Chu Fengmian suddenly made his move. The primordial sword in his hand was suddenly infused with sword intent, and he suddenly struck out. The target of this strike wasn't the immortal emperor's clone. 9 Profound. The power of the stars condensed on the blade. The moment Chu Fengmian struck out, the power of the stars descended like a river of sword qi and enveloped the immortal emperor's clone. An incarnation of an immortal emperor, even if it was just a small incarnation, still contained the power of an immortal emperor and was extremely powerful. Chu Fengmian also knew that there was no way he could contend against the immortal emperor's clone. The moment the immortal emperor's clone attacked, Chu Fengmian would have no chance of victory. Therefore, Chu Fengmian took the initiative to attack. His sword had been accumulating power all this time. At this moment, the power accumulated to the peak, and suddenly the sword poured out in torrents. The immortal emperor's clone didn't seem to have expected Chu Fengmian to take the initiative to attack. It was as if an ant was provoking a giant beast. This was beyond common sense. The immortal emperor's clone was caught off guard. However, he was, after all, an immortal emperor with countless battle experience. He was extremely calm. All of a sudden, the immortal emperor's clone waved his hand and easily blocked the sword chi galaxy. The sword chi galaxy was less than 3 inches away from the celestial emperor avatar, but it couldn't advance any further. Not bad. That should be the Jiuquan immortal art. Seems like you have obtained it. You actually transformed it into a sword technique. Compared to the Jiuquan immortal art, this is almost the same. You have such talent. The immortal emperor's clone blocked the sword chi star river. He was still carefully sizing it up. His eyes were filled with greed. The more powerful Chu Fengmian was, the more benefits he would get once he occupied Chu Fengmian's body. His strength had been stuck at this level for hundreds of thousands of years. It could be said that without a heaven-defying opportunity, his strength would not be able to improve in the future. If he wanted to improve his strength, he could only choose to seize another body to obtain a better aptitude. Although he would lose a part of his strength in a short period of time, he would be able to recover the strength of an immortal emperor with his experience. Many immortal emperors had reached the last step and couldn't go any further, so they chose to seize another body to cultivate again. In the eyes of this immortal emperor, Chu Fengmian was the best body, a perfect piece of jade. Kid, there's no need to struggle in front of yours truly. Hand over your body obediently. It's your honor to be able to become yours truly's body. The immortal emperor's clone said ferociously. Although the appearance of the immortal emperor's clone couldn't be seen clearly, the ferocious meaning in his words could still be heard. Chu Fengmian snorted coldly and didn't answer. Instead, he attacked the immortal emperor's clone with his sword again. All resistance will be meaningless. The immortal emperor's clone roared and waved his hand. Chu Fengmian's countless sword techniques were ruthlessly crushed. At the same time, a huge arm suddenly condensed out of thin air and suddenly pressed down, grabbing at Chu Fengmian. The power of the huge arm was like the power of a world. It pressed down fiercely. It was unknown how much space was crushed. In the shattered space, Chu Fengmian's body flickered repeatedly, avoiding the grasp of the huge arm. Suddenly, Chu Fengmian's body moved. His speed was extremely fast as he suddenly swept across. This time, Chu Fengmian's target was no longer the immortal emperor's clone, but young Master Zero Jian. Impudent! Chu Fengmian had just arrived in front of young Master Zero Jian. Behind Chu Fengmian, the immortal emperor's clone roared angrily. Chu Fengmian was planning to kill young Master Zero Jian in front of him. It was simply disregarding the dignity of an immortal emperor. The dignity of an immortal emperor was not to be challenged. All of a sudden, the speed of the enormous arm increased by countless times. At this moment, it came crashing down. Boom! Chu Fengmian's body was smashed to pieces by the giant arm. But at the same time as the explosion, suddenly, a figure emerged behind young Master Zero Jian. This figure was Chu Fengmian. Unknowingly, Chu Fengmian suddenly appeared behind young Master Zero Jian. The one who had been killed by the giant arm was only an illusion. Sure enough, even the power of an immortal emperor will be affected in this star cave. Chu Fengmian suddenly appeared behind young Master Zero Jian with a smile on his face. Chu Fengmian had taken the initiative to attack the immortal emperor's clone just now to probe. An immortal emperor's clone, even if it only had 1/10,000th of an immortal emperor's power, was indeed not something that Chu Fengmian could contend against. Whether it was in the Nine Heavens domains or the extraterritorial starry sky, the result would not change. Only in this place, in this star cave, there was a glimmer of hope for Chu Fengmian. The star cave was a unique region formed by the collision of two universes. The laws here were extremely chaotic. Although it was close to the three saint domains, there were still some differences. Moreover, there were some changes that could occur at any time. In fact, the power of the experts who descended here was transmitted from a distant place. Chapter 2366. Even an immortal emperor wouldn't know how to transmit his power from hundreds of millions of miles away. It would be fine if it was in a place where space was stable. However, this was the Star Cave, one of the most complicated places in space law. The power transmitted by the immortal emperor was far less than 1/10,000th of it. Therefore, the incarnation was far from being as terrifying as a real immortal emperor's incarnation. A real immortal emperor's incarnation was at least comparable to an immortal venerable. However, the power of the incarnation was only at the pinnacle of immortal monarch realm. It was only slightly stronger than young Master Zero Jian. Although it was extremely powerful, it wasn't impossible for Chu Fengmian to contend against it. Moreover, the strongest point of an immortal sovereign's incarnation wasn't their strength, but the pressure that came from the level of their strength. When an immortal sovereign's incarnation descended, even some immortal saints would feel fear in their hearts. They wouldn't dare to fight as half of their strength would be suppressed. However, the immortal emperor's pressure was meaningless in front of Chu Fengmian. Chu Fengmian was a heaven and earth variant. It could be said that he was comparable to an innate divine beast. An innate divine beast was comparable to a pinnacle immortal emperor or even a supreme ruler. When the immortal emperor's pressure descended, it came from the power of Chu Fengmian's bloodline. Thus, Chu Fengmian wasn't affected at all. After realizing all this, Chu Fengmian immediately changed his mind to escape. This young Master Zero Jian had a profound background. Moreover, his talent was incomparably heaven-defying. He wasn't much older than Chu Fengmian. One must know that Chu Fengmian's current strength was due to the accumulation of Sword Dao in his previous life. In terms of talent, young Master Zero Jian might be superior to Chu Fengmian. If he let young Master Zero Jian go today, it would be tantamount to releasing a tiger back to the mountain. If young Master Zero Jian was allowed to grow, the consequences would be unimaginable. When Chu Fengmian discovered that the immortal emperor's incarnation wasn't completely undefeatable, he made up his mind to kill young Master Zero Jian today. Young Master Zero Jian was taken aback by Chu Fengmian's sudden appearance. After Chu Fengmian stepped into the celestial realm, the bloodline power of the three innate divine beasts in his body had also improved by leaps and bounds. In particular, Chu Fengmian's control over the space Dao was dozens of times better than before. He suddenly turned into a shadow and quietly appeared behind young Noble Zero Jian. Not only young Noble Zero Jian, but even the immortal emperor's incarnation was unable to see through him. Seeing Chu Fengmian behind him, young Master Zero Jian's face changed. He hastily urged his sword to resist. However, Chu Fengmian's sword was even faster than his. The primordial sword in his hand moved, and a sword light slashed out, colliding with Zero's sword. It was a loud boom. Prince Zero's sword vibrated continuously, and the sword intent contained within it was completely shattered by the collision. Pooh! Young Master Zero's sword spat out a mouthful of blood essence. He was unable to withstand the power of the shockwave. He was already injured in the previous exchange. This time, he was even more injured. Die! After the first strike, Chu Fumian did not hesitate at all and slashed down again. Kill him while he's down. It was not easy for Chu Fumian to force young Noble Zero Jian into a desperate situation. Today, he must kill him no matter what. The sword in his hand flickered again and again, and the sword intent contained within it transformed into countless shadows of dragons and giant whales. In Chu Fumian's bloodline, the bloodlines of the two great innate divine beasts, Tianlong and Xianjing, boiled instantly and transformed into a giant sword that was hundreds of thousands of feet long. It slashed down at young Noble Zero Jian. The sword seemed to be able to split open heaven and earth. It was as if the firmament had made its move to destroy the world. Young Noble Zero Jian was almost powerless in front of the giant sword. The spiritual sword in his hand was knocked away and was caught by Chu Fumian. Young Noble Zero Jian's spiritual sword was no ordinary weapon. It was one of the top immortal weapons among countless immortal weapons. It was only one step away from becoming an extreme immortal weapon and was enough to contend with the primordial sword. Such a spiritual sword was priceless even in the three great holy realms. An extreme immortal weapon was an unattainable existence for immortal venerables. In Sword Emperor Crown's memory, there were many immortal emperors who were not qualified to wield an extreme immortal weapon. Those who could wield an extreme immortal weapon were, without exception, the strongest among the immortal emperors. A peak immortal weapon could be considered as a weapon of many immortal emperors. The spiritual sword in young Noble Zero Jian's hand belonged to this level. It was enough to be used as a weapon by some powerful immortal venerables or even weak immortal emperors. Young Noble Zero Jian was obviously favored by the immortal emperor behind him. That was why he was given such a spiritual sword. But now it belonged to Chu Fumian. At the same time, young Noble Zero Jian's strength had reached its weakest moment. Chu Fumian abruptly activated the ancient emperor's art of war and suddenly descended. This time, the invisible hand was not obstructed at all as it descended. Young Noble Zero Jian was already powerless to protect himself. How could he still care about the ancient emperor's art of war? The king's sword Qi hidden in young Noble Zero Jian's body suddenly flew out and was caught by the ancient emperor's art of war. The mark that belonged to young Noble Zero Jian was cruelly erased by Chu Fumian's heaven-devouring power. Puff! Young Noble Zero Jian spurted out another mouthful of blood. The mark on the king's sword Qi contained his heart's blood. But now, it was directly erased by Chu Fumian. The backlash was unbearable for him. After seizing the king's sword Qi, Chu Fumian continued to activate the ancient emperor's art of war to seize the other supreme sword Qi from young Noble Zero Jian's body. Chu Fumian controlled 2,815 supreme sword Qi. The remaining 185 supreme sword Qi were all in young Noble Zero Jian's hands. Right now, the most crucial king's sword Qi was already under Chu Fumian's control. The remaining 184 supreme sword Qi were still hidden in young Noble Zero Jian's body. After seizing the remaining 184 supreme sword Qi, Chu Fumian would be able to control the 3,000 supreme sword Qi and unleash the true power of the supreme sword formation. Chu Fumian used the ancient emperor's art of war to transform into an invisible giant hand that enveloped young Noble Zero Jian's body. Rays of golden light flew out from young Noble Zero Jian's body. They were the supreme sword Qi that had been seized by the ancient emperor's art of war. Chapter 2367. Young Master Zero Jian was seriously injured. His face was extremely pale, and it was extremely strenuous for him to resist the giant sword that was hundreds of thousands of feet long. He simply could not spare any effort to resist the power of the ancient emperor's art of war. Now, young Master Zero Jian had no strength to fight back and was completely at Chu Fumian's mercy. Chu Fumian did not hold back. It wasn't just young Master Zero Jian's supreme sword energy. Chu Fumian used the ancient emperor's art of war to seize his immortal artifacts and void ring. Young Master Zero Jian's status was extremely noble. He was someone favored by an immortal emperor. None of his immortal tools were ordinary grade. Almost all of them were high-grade immortal tools. They were much better than the immortal tools Chu Fengmian obtained in the 9 domains. These immortal tools were directly seized by Chu Fengmian using the ancient emperor's art of war and fell into his hands. Chu Fengmian did not have the time to refine these fairy artifacts. He directly suppressed them with his dragon's might, then threw them all into the empty ring. He would come back to inspect these immortal tools one by one when he had time in the future. All of this happened in an instant. Young Master Zero Jian had become a general without an army under Chu Fengmian's art of war. Even the spiritual sword in his hand had fallen into Chu Fengmian's hands. Only some supreme sword chi was firmly suppressed in his body to resist the ancient emperor's art of war. Young Master Zero Jian also knew that if these 3,000 supreme sword chi were obtained by one person, it would definitely cause a great change. Therefore, he would rather give up his immortal tools than give up the supreme sword chi. Chu Fengmian had seized a total of 174 supreme sword chi from young Master Zero Jian's body, including the king's sword chi that Chu Fengmian had seized. Chu Fengmian had a total of 2,990 supreme sword chi. There were only 10 supreme sword chi left. Once he obtained them, he would be able to restore the full power of the supreme sword chi. However, the last 10 supreme sword chi were suppressed in the deepest part of young Master Zero's body, suppressed in his spiritual vein. No matter how hard Chu Fengmian tried to use the ancient emperor's art of seizing war, he couldn't take the last 10 supreme sword chi from young Noble Zero's body. Chu Fengmian's eyes were filled with anxiety. He was not willing to continue this stalemate with young Noble Zero's sword. Even though Chu Fengmian had obtained 2,990 strands of supreme sword chi, he was still unable to unleash its true power. In fact, he could not even unleash half of its true power. The 3,000 supreme sword chis were a whole, and not a single one could be missing. But now, young Noble Zero's sword had hidden the remaining 10 supreme sword chi in his spiritual vein. Unless Chu Fengmian killed young Noble Zero's sword, there was no way he could obtain the remaining 10 supreme sword chi. Heavenly punishment. During this stalemate, a huge sword shadow suddenly appeared in the sky and slashed toward Chu Fengmian. After being tricked by Chu Fengmian, the immortal emperor avatar finally reacted. However, the immortal emperor avatar was very blurry and his face couldn't be seen clearly. But from this roar, one could clearly feel the anger of the immortal emperor avatar. He, a majestic immortal emperor, was actually tricked by Chu Fengmian. What he attacked with his full strength was actually just a shadow formed by Chu Fengmian. He was an immortal emperor, an emperor among immortals. His prestige was not to be challenged. Suddenly, a crack appeared above Chu Fengmian's head. A crack appeared in the star hole. Rays of golden light were emitted from the crack, dazzling everyone's eyes. The immortal emperor's incarnation had already disappeared. At this moment, Chu Fengmian suddenly noticed that the immortal emperor avatar had already disappeared. The huge sword shadow had actually appeared from the crack. The main body has descended. He actually tore a star hole. Does he want to die? Chu Fengmian's face changed drastically when he saw the crack. He never thought that he would summon the main body of an immortal emperor to come and kill Chu Fengmian. One should know that this was the star hole, the place where two universes collided. The laws here were incomparably strange, and it could be called a dangerous place. There were many dangers in the star hole that were incomparably troublesome for immortal emperors. Even immortal emperors wouldn't easily step into the star hole. But this immortal emperor actually tore the space of the star hole and wanted to descend into the star hole with his main body, directly breaking the laws of the star hole. This was an extremely crazy act. This immortal emperor was completely enraged by Chu Fengmian. He was so angry that his mind was muddled. He had already disregarded everything and wanted to descend into the star hole with his main body to kill Chu Fengmian. The prestige of an immortal emperor couldn't be challenged. Even immortal saints and immortal venerables couldn't challenge the prestige of an immortal emperor, let alone Chu Fengmian, who was just a brat who had just stepped into the celestial realm. In his opinion, an ant-like existence had actually toyed with him. In his anger, this immortal emperor disregarded all dangers and descended into the star hole to kill Chu Fengmian. Although the golden light in the crack was only an arm of the immortal emperor's main body, the sword shadow it shot out was completely different from the incarnation. Chu Fengmian's hair stood on end in an instant. An immortal emperor suddenly attacked him. Chu Fengmian's current situation was extremely dangerous. When this huge sword shadow descended, all of Chu Fengmian's power couldn't withstand a single blow. The huge sword that was originally suppressing young Master Zero Jin instantly collapsed in front of this sword shadow. Tianlong change. At this time, there was only one thought in Chu Fengmian's mind, and that was to escape quickly. Facing the main body of an immortal emperor, Chu Fengmian's strength was far from being able to contend against it even if he was 100 times stronger. Killing young Master Zero Jian to prevent future troubles and the remaining 10 Supreme Sword Chis were simply not something he should think about. Once that huge sword shadow descended, Chu Fengmian would undoubtedly die even if he had 10,000 lives. Even the terrifying recovery ability of the immortal true body would be useless. The power contained in that huge sword shadow wasn't something Chu Fengmian could contend against. No matter how strong his recovery ability was, he would be annihilated by the power contained in that huge sword shadow. His figure transformed into progenitor Tianlong and suddenly flew into the depths of the star hole. At the same time, the huge sword shadow was chasing after Chu Fengmian. Wherever the huge sword shadow passed, space would collapse. Chu Fengmian felt as if the power of the huge sword shadow was going to tear the star cave apart. Chapter 2368. As the giant sword shadow descended, it was blocked by the layers of spatial laws of the star cave. The attack of this immortal emperor had crossed hundreds of millions of miles and broken through countless layers of space to forcefully enter the star cave. It was as if he wanted to tear a hole in the star cave. If it wasn't for the resistance of the star cave's laws, the giant sword shadow would have beheaded Chu Fengmian on the spot. Even the laws of the star cave couldn't withstand the full attack of such an immortal emperor. The star cave's layers of space were broken, and a huge crack was torn open. The attack of a true immortal emperor had the power to destroy the world. If this giant sword shadow fell into the extraterritorial starry sky, it could probably destroy dozens of planets in an instant. It should be known that the spatial laws of the star cave were much stronger than the spatial laws of the extraterritorial starry sky. Yet, it couldn't withstand the giant sword shadow. Fortunately, the star cave's laws were resisting now, so Chu Fengmian could still buy some time to catch his breath. Chu Fengmian fled all the way to the depths of the star cave. The giant sword shadow was right behind Chu Fengmian, chasing after him relentlessly. Everything in the path of the giant sword shadow was destroyed. It seemed as if there was nothing in the world that could stop the giant sword shadow. Damn it! How can it be so powerful? Chu Fengmian urged the power of primogenitor Tianlong to the extreme. His speed of escape light could cross thousands of miles in an instant, but he still couldn't escape the shroud of the giant sword shadow. The giant sword shadow had been shrouding Chu Fengmian's head and was still approaching. This giant sword shadow was an attack of the immortal emperor that crossed hundreds of millions of miles. Although it was the attack of his true body, who knew how many layers of space it had crossed. Its power was less than 10%, but it was still an existence that Chu Fengmian couldn't resist. Even the current star cave couldn't stop the giant sword shadow. Rumble. The space in the star cave began to collapse. The bombardment of the giant sword shadow caused the star cave around Chu Fengmian to change. Countless spatial cracks appeared, and even a storm began to appear. Star cave storm. Chu Fengmian's expression changed drastically when he saw the storm. The star cave storm wasn't comparable to the spatial storms outside. Once a living being was drawn into the star cave storm, it might be directly drawn into the core of the star cave, where the forces of the two universes collided. The so-called star hole was, in fact, a safe place between the collision of two universes. It was even a place of collision. However, it was in other places. Once one was drawn into the storm of the star cave, one might be drawn into those places. Even immortal sages and immortal venerables might die on the spot. Even immortal emperors couldn't contend with the forces of the two universes. Chu Fengmian didn't expect that the sudden attack of an immortal emperor would cause a star cave storm. This storm engulfed everything. Instantly, Chu Fengmian felt a huge pulling force that wanted to pull him in. Of time. At this critical moment, Chu Fengmian's mind spun rapidly. Suddenly, Chu Fengmian made a decision. His figure moved abruptly and flew directly in the direction of the star hole storm. Sooner or later, Chu Fengmian would be caught up by the huge sword shadow. At that time, Chu Fengmian would die. Although it was extremely dangerous to enter the star cave storm, there was a slim chance of survival. It was up to him to decide where he would be drawn into the star cave storm. There were also some demon immortals who had entered the star cave storm and returned safely. Although the probability was less than 1 in 10,000, there was no other choice. Entering the star cave storm was Chu Fengmian's only choice. Otherwise, Chu Fengmian would die under the sword of this immortal emperor. At that time, Chu Fengmian would definitely die. Chu Fengmian's conveyance light rapidly flew into the star cave storm. At the same time, he injected all his strength into his immortal real body, protecting it with all his strength. Asterisk Kong. Asterisk, Chu Fengmian's body was drawn into the star cave storm. In an instant, he felt his body was about to be torn apart. The power of the star cave storm alone was enough to tear Chu Fengmian apart. However, Chu Fengmian guarded his immortal real body with all his might. At the same time, he urged the power of the divine tree to reinforce the 129,600 immortal crystals. One by one, the immortal crystals were reconstructed and restored. After an unknown amount of time, Chu Fengmian's consciousness began to blur. His immortal crystals had been shattered thousands of times. After being reconstructed again and again, Chu Fengmian's last bit of strength was exhausted. Now, all Chu Fengmian could do was to use his last bit of strength to protect his body. After a long time, just as Chu Fengmian's consciousness was about to fall unconscious, he finally saw a ray of light. Chu Fengmian used his last bit of strength to urge the conveyance light into the ray of light. Finally, he lost consciousness and fainted. Within the star cave storm, Chu Fengmian had to endure the force of the storm at every moment. Chu Fengmian didn't know how much time had passed. He drifted along with the star cave storm and didn't know where he ended up. If I can survive, I must kill that young master Ling Jian and that immortal emperor. I must kill them. Chu Fengmian's mind was filled with this thought before he lost consciousness. He was in such a miserable state because of these two people. As he thought about it, Chu Fengmian lost consciousness. He didn't know how long he had been unconscious for. Chu Fengmian slowly regained consciousness. As soon as he opened his eyes, he found himself in a huge house. This house was almost 100 times bigger than the houses in the 9 regions. It was 200 to 300 meters tall. At the same time, the bed Chu Fengmian was lying on was 200 to 300 meters long and wide. It was as big as a plaza. It wasn't just the bed. Everything in the house, from chairs to tables, were 100 times bigger than the ones in the 9 regions. For a moment, Chu Fengmian suspected that he had shrunk. But when he looked carefully, he found that it wasn't that he had shrunk, but that these things were just that big. The legs of the table were directly cut down from a tree that was hundreds of meters tall and installed. What exactly is this place? Chu Fengmian's mind was in a mess. He wanted to get up, but he found that his body was incomparably weak. He could barely move. Chapter 2369. Chu Fengmian carefully examined his body. Now, he could only describe it as a tragic sight. Most of the 129,600 immortal crystals were completely shattered and had lost their power. The remaining ones were also extremely broken. It could be said that almost none of the 129,600 immortal crystals were still intact. However, this was normal. In the star Hole storm, Chu Fengmian's body was torn apart again and again. All of Chu Fengmian's power was used to reconstruct the immortal crystals. In the end, Chu Fengmian's power was completely exhausted. He could only restore and reconstruct some. There were a few times when the 129,600 immortal crystals in Chu Fengmian's body were almost completely shattered, and Chu Fengmian almost died. Now, Chu Fengmian's body could actually be said to be the 129,600 immortal crystals. Once all 129,600 immortal crystals were shattered, Chu Fengmian would die on the spot. Fortunately, in the end, when Chu Fengmian was almost unable to hold on any longer, he discovered the light and rushed in with all his strength. It seemed that the light should be outside the star hole. Even now, Chu Fengmian didn't know where exactly he was. The house in front of him was strangely huge. Although there were some palaces in the 9 regions that would be built similarly huge, they definitely wouldn't build such huge tables, chairs, and beds. Even Chu Fengmian saw that the cups placed on the table were 100 times bigger than ordinary cups. Chu Fengmian had never heard of such a place. Even in Sword Emperor Guan's memories, he had never heard of such a place. The laws here. Chu Fengmian woke up and could use his spiritual consciousness a little. After exploring for a while, Chu Fengmian discovered that the laws here were incomparably complex and the spatial laws were incomparably tough. Such laws definitely wouldn't exist in the extraterritorial starry sky. It seems that I've arrived at the 3 great sacred regions. I just don't know where this place is. Chu Fengmian muttered to himself. After exploring for a while, Chu Fengmian understood that he had arrived at the 3 great sacred regions. Although it was different from what Chu Fengmian had imagined, he still successfully arrived at the 3 great sacred regions in the midst of the chaos. However, the 3 Saint Domains were vast and boundless. How big are the 3 Saint Domains? Even an immortal emperor wouldn't be able to explore them all. There was once an immortal emperor who tried to travel to every place in the 3 sacred realms, but he failed in the end. However, the current maps of the 3 great sacred realms were all written by the former immortal emperor. There weren't many records of the 3 great sacred regions in the Sword Emperor Guan's memories. After all, the Upper Sword sect had always been in the 9 regions and the 9 regions of heaven. They didn't know much about the 3 great sacred regions. The Sword Emperor Crown's memories did not have any records of the remote places in the 3 sacred regions. The scene in front of him was clearly not in the region of the Sword Emperor Crown's memories. It looks like I was saved by someone. At this point, Chu Fengmian suddenly realized that his body was wrapped in strips of cloth. There was some medicinal liquid within the cloth. Someone had helped Chu Fengmian dress his wound. This strip of cloth was also incomparably large. It was only a single piece, but it completely covered Chu Fengmian. Chu Fengmian was completely wrapped up. These herbs are immortal blood herbs. Chu Fengmian sniffed the medicinal fragrance and was a little surprised. Chu Fengmian had obtained the Upper Sword Sect's inheritance and also obtained many records of the Upper Sword Sect's medicine hall. Chu Fengmian already knew many records of immortal herbs. The liquid that was applied to his body was none other than the immortal blood herb's juice. The immortal blood herb was an immortal herb. Although it was the most common immortal herb, it was still priceless. It was rumored that it had the effect of reviving the dead. Although its true effect wasn't as exaggerated as the rumors, it still had the effect of healing injuries and tempering the body. For example, the price of the immortal blood herb wasn't inferior to the price of an immortal weapon. In the 9 regions, there weren't many people who had heard of this immortal herb. Now, someone was using it to apply medicine on Chu Fengmian. This kind of action was extremely extravagant. Although this was the 3 great sacred regions, and immortal herbs weren't as rare as the 9 regions. However, in the Sword Emperor Guan's memories, even in the 3 great sacred regions, the price of an immortal herb was equivalent to at least the price of an ancient sacred medicine in the 9 regions. It wasn't something that ordinary immortals could obtain. Ordinary immortal herbs had to be complemented by several immortal herbs and sacred medicines to be refined into elixirs in order to unleash its full medicinal effect. If it was applied directly to the body, the medicinal effect of the immortal blood herb wouldn't even be 10% or 20%. But now, Chu Fumian was so severely injured that he couldn't be picky. Moreover, someone was using the immortal blood herb to heal Chu Fumian's injuries. Obviously, it was to save Chu Fumian. Chu Fumian could only be grateful to this person. Although the effect of applying the immortal blood herb directly wasn't as good as refining it into elixirs, it was still an immortal herb after all. It could nourish the body and heal injuries. An endless stream of medicinal power flowed into Chu Fumian's body. The immortal crystals in Chu Fumian's body were slowly healing his injuries. A few hours passed. About a dozen immortal crystals had been completely healed. Chu Fumian could finally use a little power. Although this little bit of power was extremely weak, it was enough for Chu Fumian to use the sky-devouring secret technique once. The medicinal power of the immortal blood herb could only seep into Chu Fumian's body slowly. It would take at least 7 to 8 days for the medicinal power to be completely absorbed. For Chu Fumian, this was too slow. He needed to recover from his injuries as soon as possible. After all, although Chu Fumian seemed to be safe, he still had to be careful in this unfamiliar place. Otherwise, he wouldn't have any strength to resist if there was any danger. Recovering from his injuries and strength was the most important thing. Chu Fumian slowly activated the sky-devouring secret technique. With Chu Fumian's strength, activating the sky-devouring secret technique should have been a piece of cake. However, Chu Fumian's injuries were so severe that he didn't dare to use too much power. He could only accumulate power bit by bit to activate it. After a full 3 minutes, a small vortex condensed on Chu Fumian's body. Chu Fumian finally let out a sigh of relief. Chu Fumian activated the sky-devouring secret technique and devoured the immortal blood herb on Chu Fumian's body. In a few breaths' time, the immortal blood herb's juice was completely devoured by the sky-devouring secret technique. It turned into pure medicinal power and poured into Chu Fumian's body. Chapter 2370. The elixir rushed into Chu Fumian's body and was immediately devoured by the immortal crystal. After a few breaths of time, hundreds of immortal crystals were restored. This made Chu Fumian feel a lot more relaxed, although only a small part of his injuries had been healed. However, there were no other immortal herbs to heal his injuries. Without immortal herbs, Chu Fumian could only absorb the spiritual chi of heaven and earth bit by bit to heal his injuries. The spiritual chi of the 3 great sacred domains was much denser than that of the 9 domains. It was almost at the level of immortal chi. It was no wonder that the 9 domains had undergone drastic changes. The spiritual chi of heaven's 9 domains had become much denser just by opening a crack that was connected to it. It was said that the spiritual chi of heaven's 9 domains was denser than that of the 3 great sacred domains. With such dense spiritual chi, cultivating in heaven's 9 domains would be much faster. It was no wonder that the 3 great sacred domains had so many experts. Just the cultivation conditions alone were incomparable. Moreover, such pure spiritual chi could also grow many immortal herbs and sacred medicines. The growth conditions of immortal herbs and sacred medicines were extremely harsh. They could only grow in places with dense spiritual chi. However, in the 3 great sacred domains, almost everywhere was filled with dense spiritual chi. The disparity in resources in various aspects led to the disparity between the 9 domains and the 3 great sacred domains. However, it was unknown how long it would take for Chu Fumian to heal his injuries with spiritual chi of heaven and earth. It might take decades or even centuries to fully heal his injuries. Chu Fumian also decided that after he recovered some strength, he would take the initiative to look for immortal herbs to heal his injuries. Fortunately, I didn't lose anything. At this time, Chu Fumian observed his body and found that his empty ring was still there. When he entered the star hole storm, Chu Fengmian threw his empty ring into an immortal crystal. Under the protection of the immortal crystal, the empty ring was still there. The empty ring was still there, along with the things that Chu Fengmian had taken from young Master Zero Sword. The Monarch Sword Chi was still in Chu Fengmian's body. However, the Supreme Sword Chi was now extremely weak. It hid in Chu Fengmian's body and could not even activate a little bit of its power. In the Starhole Storm, Chu Fengmian had almost exhausted all his means to protect himself. The Supreme Sword Chi's power was also exhausted in the Starhole Storm. Fortunately, the unparalleled Sword Chi was still present. As Chu Fengmian recovered his strength, the power of the unparalleled Sword Chi could also be recovered. The battle between Chu Fengmian and young Master Zero Sword had been extremely dangerous. He had almost died. Fortunately, he hadn't gained nothing. The King Sword Chi he had obtained from young Noble Zero Sword and the other Supreme Sword Chis could be said to be Chu Fengmian's greatest harvest. Right now, Chu Fengmian had 2,990 strands of Ultimate Sword Chi. He only needed the last 10 strands of Ultimate Sword Chi to gather the 3,000 strands. Moreover, the King Sword Chi was also under Chu Fengmian's control. The 10 Supreme Sword Chi in the hands of young Master Zero Jian were no longer a threat to Chu Fengmian. Without the King's Sword Chi, young Master Zero Jian was no longer a threat to Chu Fengmian. Chu Fengmian was a little disappointed. If he could obtain the last 10 strands of Supreme Sword Chi in young Noble Zero's hands, he would be able to gather 3,000 strands of Supreme Sword Chi. The power of the Supreme Sword Chi would undergo a qualitative change. 3,000 Supreme Sword Chis were unleashed at the same time, forming a sword formation. Just the power of the Supreme Sword Chis alone was enough to fight against the Celestial Sage. Unfortunately, without the last 10 Supreme Sword Chi, the power of the Supreme Sword Chi would be greatly reduced. However, because of the Immortal Emperor, Chu Fengmian didn't have any chance to escape. After all, if he had hesitated, he would have died on the spot and wouldn't have been able to escape into the Star Cave Storm. Chu Fengmian's escape was already a close shave. When I recover my strength, I'll find young Master Immortal Sword and get the last 10 Supreme Sword Chi. Killing intent flashed in Chu Fengmian's eyes. He now had control of the 2,990 Supreme Sword Chi. It wouldn't be difficult to find the last 10 Supreme Sword Chi. Although the 3 Saint Domains were huge, young Master Immortal Sword wasn't a nobody. It shouldn't be difficult to find him. What Chu Fengmian was worried about was the Immortal Emperor behind him. However, it was impossible for an Immortal Emperor to protect young Master Immortal Sword all the time. After all, for an Immortal Emperor, giving him a protective jade talisman was already a great favor. Even their own children weren't qualified to be protected by an Immortal Emperor all the time. The most important thing now is to recover from my injuries. Chu Fengmian shook his head and quickly turned his thoughts back. His current strength was only at the level of an Emperor Realm Master. He hadn't even reached the Heaven Realm. In the 3 Saint Domains, where Masters were as common as clouds, this strength was nothing. Chu Fengmian wouldn't have the strength to fight back. He had to recover his strength first before thinking about other things. Chu Fengmian opened young Master Immortal Sword's space ring. There were some immortal artifacts, materials, and so on. When he was in the Starhole Storm, Chu Fengmian took out all the healing pills in the space ring to resist the Starhole Storm. In the Starhole Storm, Chu Fengmian's strength was almost squeezed to the extreme, so he didn't dare to hold back. Most of the pills had been consumed in the Starhole Storm, but Chu Fengmian still found a few that had slipped through the net after searching young Master Immortal Sword's space ring. In the Starhole Storm, Chu Fengmian focused all his attention on how to resist the storm, so he didn't carefully search for some pills hidden in the corners. Chu Fengmian rummaged through young Master Immortal Sword's space ring and found 2 immortal pills and 3 ancient saint pills. This result made Chu Fengmian feel helpless. With his injuries, even if he used immortal pills, he would need at least several hundred of them to fully recover. These pills were simply a drop in the bucket. But for the current Chu Fengyan, there was nothing he could be picky about. Now that he was in the three Saint Domains, in a completely unfamiliar place, Chu Fengyan would be safer if he could improve his strength even a little bit. Chu Fengyan took out the 5 pills and operated the heaven-devouring secret technique. Suddenly, the 5 pills were swallowed by the heaven-devouring secret technique and shattered, turning into extremely pure medicinal efficacies that poured into Chu Fengyan's body. Chapter 2371. With the influx of this medicinal efficacy, the immortal crystals in Chu Fengyan's body began to recover and reconstruct. Chu Fengyan deliberately injected the medicinal efficacy into the slightly injured immortal crystals, so that they could temporarily recover more immortal crystals. A total of 15 minutes passed, and the medicinal efficacy of these 5 pills was completely absorbed by the immortal crystals. The number of immortal crystals in Chu Fengyan's body had also recovered to about 1,000. This was equivalent to about 1% of Chu Fengyan's strength when he was at his peak. However, because of his injuries, in fact, Chu Fengyan's strength was not even 1% of his peak. However, this was equivalent to the strength of a heaven realm cultivator, and he had a little bit of power to protect himself. He just didn't know who saved Chu Fengyan. Where is this place? Chu Fengyan also had some understanding of the 3 great sacred domains through the memory of the Sword Emperor crown. The strength of the 3 sacred realms differed greatly from region to region. In some remote places, a celestial realm warrior was already considered a decent expert. If Chu Fengyan was in those remote places, his current strength was enough to settle down. But if Chu Fengyan was in the prosperous places of the 3 great sacred domains, then his strength was not enough. The strength of a few disciples of the giant sects in the 3 great sacred domains surpassed Chu Fengyan's current strength. You're awake? Just as Chu Fengyan was still thinking, the door of the house was suddenly pushed open, and a huge figure walked in from outside. Chu Fengyan looked over, and a little surprise flashed in his eyes, because the person in front of him was really too tall. That person was a giant close to 100 meters tall. He was wearing clothes made of animal skin, and his muscles were bulging. As he stood there, he resembled a giant tree that reached into the sky. A 100-meter-tall giant was not surprising to Chu Fengyan. After all, Emperor Realm, Heaven Realm cultivators, and monster gods all had the ability to control their size. If Chu Fengyan wanted, he could also change his size to a few thousand meters in an instant. But what surprised Chu Fengyan was that the giant in front of him looked exactly like his original body. For example, although Chu Fengyan could change his body to 1,000 meters in size, his original body was still the size of an ordinary person. However, this 100-meter-tall giant's body was already that big. Although Chu Fengyan had learned a lot about the foreign races from his Sword Emperor crown, he had never seen such a tall person before. What made Chu Fengyan feel even more strange was that when the giant walked in, Chu Fengyan actually felt some sort of blood connection with him, as if they were the same kind. Undying true body. This person has also condensed an undying body? Chu Fengyan's eyes suddenly changed. He could see that under the giant's bulging muscles, there were also sparkling crystals, a total of 129,600 undying crystals. This giant was like Chu Fengyan, condensing an undying true body. Moreover, it was only slightly weaker than Chu Fengyan's immortal true body. This giant's strength was at least at the immortal king realm. As expected of the 3 great sacred regions, just a random person I met had such strength. Chu Fengyan could not help but think. Chu Fengyan was the only living being he had met in outer space who had condensed an undying true body. He hadn't expected to meet one so soon after arriving at the 3 sacred realms. Chu Fengyan sized up the giant in front of him. The giant also walked in and came to the bedside. Seeing that Chu Fengyan had woken up, he said with joy, "When I saw you, your body was about to shatter. I thought there was no hope for you. Fortunately, I went to the shaman apothecary and got some medicine back. When the giant spoke, he did not hide the joy in his eyes. Thank you for saving me. When Chu Fengmian heard the giant's words, he knew that this giant must have saved him. Although the immortal bloodgrass did not save Chu Fengmian's life, without its medicinal power, Chu Fengmian did not know how long he would have been unconscious. This was a great help to Chu Fengmian. No need to thank me. We are all of the same race. No need to be so polite. When the giant heard Chu Fengmian's thanks, he said hurriedly. He sized up Chu Fengmian again and said, "You look strange. You look very unfamiliar. You don't look like someone from our tribe. Which tribe are you from?" "Same race?" Hearing these two words, Chu Fengmian could not help but be stunned. He looked at the giant before him and then looked at himself. No matter how he looked, Chu Fengmian could not tell that he was of the same race as the giant before him. However, from the tone of the giant before him, it did not seem like he was joking. Moreover, the term tribe was usually only used in the desolate era, when the primal chaos was created. Chu Fengmian could not help but ask, "Tribe? Where's this place?" "This is the Kunwa tribe." "Oh, it should be said that it belongs to the south of the southern wasteland of the northern region. The surrounding 10,000 miles belongs to our Kunwa tribe." The giant scratched his head, as if he was trying to recall something, and then he remembered this. "According to the patriarch, the southern wasteland of our tribe is an incomparably desolate place. This is also the first time I met someone of the same race outside. That's why I brought you back. Northern region, southern wasteland?" Chu Fengmian frowned and searched the memories of the Sword Emperor crown. These two terms were unfamiliar to Chu Fengmian. Obviously, it was rarely mentioned in the Sword Emperor crown's memories. He searched for a long time before he found the records of the northern region. The northern region belonged to Lihin Heaven, one of the three great sacred regions. In Lihin Heaven, it was considered a forbidden area. It was said that the northern region was an area formed from a fragment of the ancient Barrens continent. The various aspects of it were extremely similar to the ancient Barrens continent. Therefore, it had always been occupied by the foreign races that survived the great calamity of the ancient Barrens. This was because the 100 races were hostile to humans and the demon race. Once one entered the northern region rashly, it was extremely easy to be besieged. Therefore, the northern region was also listed as one of the forbidden areas of Lihin Heaven. The various major sects did not allow their disciples to step into it. Therefore, even in the Sword Emperor crown's memories, there were only a few records of the northern region. Chu Fengmian also searched carefully before he found this little record. Then, the giant before him should be from the 100 races of the ancient Barrens? Chu Fengmian looked at the giant before him and could not help but think. The 100 races of the ancient Barrens were the overlords of the ancient Barrens era. They came in different forms. Some were as tall as mountains, while others were as small as dust. It was not strange. When Chu Fengmian did not explore the memories, he also had some guesses. However, according to the records of the Sword Emperor crown, the 100 races of the ancient Barrens in the northern region should be extremely hostile to humans. However, the giant before him was extremely polite to Chu Fengmian. Chapter 2372. This was somewhat different from what was recorded. Chu Fengmian also vaguely guessed that the giant was so enthusiastic about taking care of Chu Fengmian because he was of the same race. However, Chu Fengmian was clearly a human. His current appearance was exactly the same as a human's. "Why do you call me of the same race?" Chu Fengmian thought for a moment and asked the giant in front of him. Since the giant was willing to save Chu Fengmian, he naturally did not have any hostility towards Chu Fengmian. Moreover, Chu Fengmian could not see anything strange in his eyes. If the giant in front of him wanted to harm Chu Fengmian, he could have done it when Chu Fengmian was unconscious. It was impossible for him to use the elixir to heal Chu Fengmian. For the time being, the giant in front of him should be trustworthy. Chu Fengmian had just arrived in the three great holy regions, especially in the most mysterious northern region. He knew very little about this place. The giant in front of him was the best person for Chu Fengmian to ask. You and I are both from the sorcerer tribe. We are both descendants of the great sorcerer ancestor. Of course, we are of the same race. Why do you ask? Hearing Chu Fengmian's words, the giant said strangely. It was as if Chu Fengmian had asked a very common question. Sorcerer tribe? Chu Fengmian frowned when he heard this. He carefully searched through the memories of the Sword Emperor crown and found some records about the sorcerer tribe. The sorcerer tribe was a race that was born when the world was just created. It was even more ancient than the 100 tribes of the ancients. It was extremely rare at the end of the ancients era. It was said that when the sorcerer tribe was at its peak, they had a great battle with the ancients era. After that battle, they were completely silent. The sorcerer tribe did not exist in the era when the Shang sword sect was born. Therefore, some records about the sorcerer tribe were only passed down by word of mouth. This person is actually from the legendary sorcerer tribe. Chu Fengmian was shocked. He did not expect that he would encounter such a legendary race. However, the giant's next words puzzled Chu Fengmian. He actually said that Chu Fengmian was also from the sorcerer tribe. Chu Fengmian was a pure human. Chu Fengmian was aware of this. Although he had obtained countless opportunities and integrated the origin power of the 3 innate divine beasts, he had become a variant of the heavens and earth. However, none of these had anything to do with the sorcerer tribe. However, Chu Fengmian suddenly recalled that young Master Zhou Jian had mentioned Chu Fengmian and the shaman tribe when they were fighting. At that time, Chu Fengmian didn't think too much about it. However, the giant also said that Chu Fengmian was from the shaman tribe. This was definitely not a coincidence. But my human, Chu Fengmian could not help but ask. No, you're from the sorcerer tribe. You can condense the heavenly sorcerer real body. You must have pure sorcerer tribe blood. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to condense the heavenly sorcerer real body. The giant shook his head and said, Look, this is the heavenly wizard true body, a power that only belongs to us wizards. As the giant spoke, he suddenly spread his arms, and 129,600 immortal crystals appeared on his skin, covering his entire body. The faint silhouette of a pair of wings appeared on his back. However, this pair of wings had yet to fully condense. The giant in front of him looked very similar to Chu Fengmian when he was demonized. Celestial wizard true body? Chu Fengmian's expression changed slightly when he saw the giant's transformation. He seemed to understand. This immortal real body was the heavenly wizard real body of the sorcerer tribe. It was no wonder that the sword sect's records did not mention the origin of the immortal real body. It was from the sorcerer tribe. The sorcerer tribe had fallen into silence when the 100 tribes rose. It was no wonder that there were not many records about the immortal real body. Chu Fengmian also understood the strength of the immortal real body. The sorcerer tribe was rumored to be the most powerful tribe in an era. They were even strong enough to fight against sovereigns and peak immortal emperors. The sorcerer tribe was a tribe that relied purely on physical strength. Their physical bodies were said to be the strongest in the world. In the primordial era, even the connate divine beasts could not compare to the sorcerer tribe's physical body. Chu Fengmian did not expect that the immortal real body he cultivated was the legendary heavenly wizard real body. However, only those with sorcerer tribe blood were qualified to cultivate the heavenly wizard real body. Chu Fengmian thought of young emperor, heavenly king wasteland, and even mad dragon emperor. They had cultivated the immortal real body to the half-step level, but could not fully condense it. At first, Chu Fengmian suspected that they lacked treasures to cultivate their bodies. However, now it seemed that what they lacked was the most fatal thing, the sorcerer tribe blood. Only those with sorcerer tribe blood were qualified to cultivate the heavenly wizard real body. However, Chu Fengmian did not have sorcerer tribe blood. How did he succeed? Could it be because of the bronze, heavenly demon skeleton? Chu Fengmian suddenly thought that he started cultivating the immortal real body because he had obtained the bronze, heavenly demon skeleton and devoured it. Then he condensed the embryonic form of the immortal real body and advanced step by step. If Chu Fengmian had sorcerer tribe blood, it must have come from the bronze heavenly demon. However, The bronze heavenly demon was one of the 10 heavenly demons, the ancestor of the demon tribe. How could it be related to the sorcerer tribe? Chu Fengmian did not know how complicated it was. It involved many secrets of the remote antiquity era. There were many things that Chu Fengmian was not qualified to know now. However, Chu Fengmian was now regarded as a member of the sorcerer tribe because he had condensed the heavenly wizard real body. This was good news for Chu Fengmian. Chu Fengmian should be in a sorcerer tribe now. Here, Chu Fengmian should be very safe with his identity as a member of the sorcerer tribe. At least, if Chu Fengmian was a human, the giant would not save him if he did not kill him. Thinking of this, Chu Fengmian accepted his identity as a member of the sorcerer tribe with a clear conscience. Anyway, Chu Fengmian had enough identities. One more would not make a difference. Moreover, in the northern region, being a member of the sorcerer tribe was obviously much safer than being a human. At least before he recovered from his injuries, Chu Fengmian had to be a member of the sorcerer tribe. I had not recovered from my injuries. There are many things that I can't remember. Thanks to your reminder, I remembered some things. Chu Fengmian touched his forehead and said, "That's right. It's not easy for you to wake up from your injuries. You'd better recuperate." Hearing this, the giant said hurriedly, Chapter 2373. Looks like you've absorbed all the medicinal power of the immortal bloodgrass. Looks like your body is pretty good, probably stronger than mine. You've absorbed all the medicinal power so quickly. The giant glanced at Chu Fengmian and saw that the medicinal power of the immortal bloodgrass had been completely consumed. He turned around and left the room. "Wait here. I'll go to the witch apothecary and ask for some more immortal herbs." After saying that, the giant left the room in a hurry without waiting for Chu Fengmian's reply. Only Chu Fengmian was left lying on the bed. The sorcerer tribe in the northern region. I didn't expect to meet such a legendary tribe and get involved in this. Chu Fengmian muttered to himself. He didn't know if all this was a coincidence. It was too secretive for Chu Fengmian to know. However, since he was already here, he might as well take things as they came. Chu Fengmian's current situation was better than he had imagined. At least here, his safety shouldn't be a problem. Since that was the case, Chu Fengmian could use his identity as a member of the sorcerer tribe to slowly recover from his injuries. After all, strength was the only thing that mattered in the 3 great sacred regions. Without recovering his strength, Chu Fengmian couldn't go to other places. During this period, he could only recuperate here temporarily. While Chu Fengmian was thinking, the wooden door of the room was suddenly pushed open again. The giant walked in again, holding a bunch of immortal herbs in his hand. There seemed to be about a dozen of them. The giant arrived in front of Chu Fengmian and glanced at him. A troubled expression appeared on his face. "You're too small now. Put the herbs there. I'll do it myself." Chu Fengmian saw through the giant's thoughts and said with a smile. His current appearance was less than the size of the giant's finger. It was already very difficult for the giant to change Chu Fengmian's medicine. It would be better for Chu Fengmian to do it himself. All right then. The giant didn't stand on ceremony. He put all the immortal herbs beside Chu Fengmian and said with a troubled expression, "These are all the immortal herbs that our Kunwa tribe has collected in the past few days. The rest will only be available in a few days. Thank you. These herbs have already helped a lot." Chu Fengmian heard the apologetic tone in the giant's words and felt a little strange. Chu Fengmian was injured. Now, he was taking the immortal herbs of the Kunwu tribe for free. The value of these immortal herbs was not low even in the 3 great sacred regions. Now, he was giving them to Chu Fengmian for free and even felt apologetic. Chu Fengmian also knew what the giant meant. Chu Fengmian's injuries were too severe. It wasn't something that could be completely healed by these dozen or so immortal medicines. However, to be able to give Chu Fengmian a few stalks of immortal herbs at a time like this was already a huge favor. However, this giant had brought over an entire tribe's worth of immortal herbs for Chu Fengmian. "We're all of the same race. There's no need to thank me," the giant said with a silly smile. "Are they of the same race?" Chu Fengmian couldn't help but murmur to himself. He felt a bit of warmth in his heart. It had been a long time since Chu Fengmian felt this kind of warmth outside of the Sword Dao Gate. Let's see if we can do something for the shamans here after we recover from our injuries. Chu Fengmian thought to himself. Chu Fengmian had always made a clear distinction between kindness and hatred. He wouldn't show any mercy to his enemies, and he was cold and heartless. However, Chu Fengmian would also do his best to repay those who were kind to him. Chu Fengmian didn't think about it anymore. He picked up a stalk of immortal bloodgrass and started to heal his injuries. He applied it on his body and started to bandage his injuries. Although Chu Fengmian could directly activate the heaven-devouring secret skill to devour all the medicinal power of these immortal medicines, it might not be too shocking to do so. Although Chu Fengmian was in the shaman tribe, he had only seen this giant in front of him. Although he was so friendly to Chu Fengmian, it didn't mean that the other shaman tribes would be friendly to Chu Fengmian as well. After all, Chu Fengmian was an outsider in this shaman tribe. Chu Fengmian didn't want to reveal too much before he truly understood the shaman tribe. Chu Fengmian chatted casually with the giant shaman as he bandaged his wounds. The giant shaman told him a lot about himself. His name was Wu Mo, and he was a preparatory shaman warrior in the Kunwa tribe. It was said that he was qualified to become a shaman warrior this year. Shaman warrior was a title in the shaman tribe. Only those who had reached the peak of the immortal king realm were qualified to become shaman warriors. Shaman warriors were also the main force of each shaman tribe. The shaman tribe was brave and good at fighting. They were born with great strength. When they grew up, they would have the strength of the heavenly human realm. However, most of the shaman tribe's strength would reach the peak of the immortal general or immortal marquis realm. Only those who had the potential to become shaman warriors could become shaman warriors. Shaman warriors were extremely rare in the shaman tribe, and their status was extremely high. For example, the Kunwa tribe was only a small tribe. There were more than 100 shaman tribe members, and only 3 of them were shaman warriors. There were only 5 reserve sorcerer warriors like Wu Mo. Moreover, not every preparatory shaman warrior could become a real shaman warrior. The strength of the shaman tribe was closely related to their bloodline. The stronger their bloodline, the faster their strength would increase. Wu Mo had a trace of the shaman ancestors' bloodline, which is why he had the hope of becoming a shaman warrior. However, this bloodline was extremely thin, and whether he could become a real shaman warrior depended on his own efforts. Other than shaman warriors, there were also shaman pharmacists and shaman priests in the shaman tribe. Shaman pharmacists were the pharmacists of the shaman tribe. They were used to identify the effects of immortal medicines and make medicine for injuries. Although shaman pharmacists were not strong, once someone in the tribe was injured, they would have to rely on them to recover. Therefore, their status was extremely high. As for shaman priests, they were the people with the highest status in the shaman tribe. They were also the tribe leaders of the shaman tribe. They inherited the most ancient sorcery and could enlighten the children of the shaman tribe. They could be called the teachers of the shaman tribe. In a shaman tribe, shaman priests and shaman pharmacists had the highest status, followed by shaman warriors and preparatory shaman warriors. The rest were the ordinary shaman tribe members. However, even the ordinary shaman tribe members had the strength of immortal generals and immortal marquises. They could hunt demonic beasts and even wild beasts. According to Wu Mo, there were many desolate beasts residing in a mountain range near the Kunwa tribe. Many of the tribesmen of the Kunwa tribe went there to hunt the desolate beasts and devour their blood essence to strengthen their bodies and increase their strength. Moreover, ordinary immortal medicines grew in the mountains. In order to obtain immortal medicines, they would enter the mountains to fight with wild beasts. The shaman tribe's strength increased by devouring immortal medicines and blood essence of wild beasts, as well as fighting with wild beasts. It could be said that every member of the sorcerer tribe had grown up through countless battles and battles. Chapter 2374. While Chu Fengmian applied the immortal blood grass on his body, he also secretly activated the sky devouring secret skill to devour the medicine. However, even if he only activated a little bit of the sky devouring secret skill, it was still 10 times faster than before. Although it was fast, it was not suspicious. At the same time, while chatting with Wu Mo, Chu Fumian also learned some information about the other sorcerer tribes. The Earth Sorcerer Tribe was just a small tribe among the countless sorcerer tribes. Of course, it was considered a big one, so there was a sorcerer in it. A real small tribe only had a few dozen sorcerer tribesmen and no sorcerer. Of course, there were some big tribes among the sorcerer tribe. According to Wu Mo, he had been to a big tribe called the Wuyuan tribe, which had 3,000 to 4,000 sorcerer tribesmen. Among them, there were hundreds of sorcerer warriors and even a sorcerer general. A sorcerer general was a title that only sorcerer tribesmen who were stronger than celestial saints were qualified to receive. In a big tribe, there was actually a sorcerer general, a celestial saint expert. According to Wu Mo, the Wuyuan tribe was not a big tribe. A real big tribe could gather tens of thousands of sorcerer tribesmen and even build a huge city. However, Wu Mo had never been there himself. He had only heard about such a big tribe from the sorcerer priests. It was said that in a big tribe, there were sorcerer kings who were stronger than sorcerer generals. Sorcerer kings were at the peak of the 3 great holy realms. As for the immortal emperors of the sorcerer tribe, they were the divine magi of the sorcerer tribe. Even Wu Mo had only heard about them and had never seen them in person. However, according to the rumors, there must be divine magi in the sorcerer tribe. Otherwise, the northern region that was occupied by the sorcerer tribe would not have become a forbidden area in Lian heaven. The northern region was not desolate. Instead, it could be said to be a treasure land. The environment here was very similar to the ancient Barrens continent. The spiritual chi was rich and there were many immortal herbs. If the sorcerer tribe did not have divine magi, they would have been driven out of the northern region. After all, there must be immortal emperors among the forces in Lian heaven. An immortal emperor was more powerful than 10 immortal primes. If there were no divine magi in the Wu clan, 1 or 2 immortal emperors would be enough to wipe out the Wu clan. They would not allow the Wu clan to occupy the northern region. Although there were other clans living in the northern region, most of them were the 100 clans of the ancients who had survived the great primordial calamity. However, as a whole, the sorcerer tribe was the leader. Strength was the only thing that mattered. The reason why the sorcerer tribe had such a high status was because of their terrifying strength. Time passed quickly as the two of them chatted, and the sky darkened. "Brother Chu, recuperate well. I'll look for medicine for you tomorrow." From his conversation with Wu Mo, Chu Fumian knew that the people of the sorcerer tribe usually had the surname Wu. Chu Fumian's name was a little strange. Hence, he used the surname Chu and named himself Wu Chu. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. Wu Mo said to Chu Fumian. He was about to leave when Chu Fumian stopped him. "Oh right, is there no shaman apothecary in the Koan Wu tribe who knows how to refine pills?" Chu Fumian suddenly asked. If a divine medicine was taken directly, it would be difficult to bring out 20% or 30% of its medicinal efficacy. Even if Chu Fumian had the sky-devouring secret skill, it would waste a lot of medicinal efficacy to apply the divine medicine externally. Many divine medicines required the assistance of other divine medicines and sacred medicines in order to bring out the full medicinal efficacy of the divine medicine. Take the divine bloodgrass as an example. If Chu Fumian could find a few sacred medicines, he could refine it into the divine blood elixir and bring out 10 times the medicinal efficacy of the divine bloodgrass. Normally, when a martial artist or demon god obtained a divine medicine, their first reaction would be to refine it into an elixir. However, the sorcerer tribe was extremely extravagant. They applied it externally or took it orally. This made Chu Fumian feel a little strange, and he could not help but ask, "Refined pills?" A shaman apothecary who knows how to refine pills can only be found in the big tribes. How can our Koan Wu tribe be qualified to invite one? Wu Mo shook his head when he heard Chu Fumian's words. Even identifying the divine medicine requires the shaman apothecary in the tribe to come personally. We can only look for it according to the image given by the shaman apothecary. Hearing Wu Mo's words, Chu Fengmian suddenly felt helpless. It was no wonder that most of the divine medicines here were the divine bloodgrass and purple vein grass. Although these two types of immortal herbs were considered ordinary immortal herbs, there would be other immortal herbs and sacred herbs growing in the vicinity of these two types of immortal herbs. These divine medicines and sacred medicines were the best to supplement the divine bloodgrass and purple vein grass. However, they cannot be seen at all. It seemed that Wu Mo and the others did not know about the divine medicines, so they could only look for them according to the shaman apothecary's instructions. As for the shaman apothecary, he did not even know how to refine pills, so he probably did not know much. Therefore, he gathered these two divine medicines. The spiritual energy in the northern region was rich. Obviously, there were more than two types of divine medicines. If they could find some divine medicines and sacred medicines and refine the divine bloodgrass and purple vein grass into elixirs, they would be able to bring out 10 times the medicinal efficacy. It was much better than wasting a large amount of medicinal efficacy. Can you help me gather some herbs when you go out to look for herbs tomorrow? Chu Fengmian looked at Wu Mo and asked. At the same time, a jade talisman flew out from his hand. The talisman recorded the appearances of the divine medicines accompanying the divine bloodgrass and purple vein grass. This is... Brother Chu, are you a shaman apothecary? Wu Mo was shocked when he saw the images in the jade talisman. Those who knew about divine medicines were all shaman apothecaries in the sorcerer tribe. They had a very high status. In the Kunwa tribe, the shaman apothecary status was second only to the shaman priest, who was the tribe leader. I have learned a little about medicine Dao. Chu Fengmian nodded. It was a tacit admission. Since Chu Fengmian wanted to refine elixirs, he naturally had to use his identity as a shaman apothecary. Since the sorcerer tribe also had alchemy skills, it was not a big deal for Chu Fengmian to perform it. No wonder Brother Chu recovered so quickly. It turns out that Brother Chu is a shaman apothecary. Wu Mo spoke with a hint of respect in his tone. Okay, tomorrow I will tell everyone the appearance of the divine medicines in the jade talisman so that everyone can gather them. No need to go through so much trouble. Chu Fengmian moved his palm, and more jade talismans flew out. A total of 20 jade talismans fell into Wu Mo's hand. In the Kunwa tribe, there were only 7 or 8 sorcerer tribesmen who were in charge of gathering herbs every day. Chu Fengmian had refined so many jade talismans that it should be enough. Okay, I will send the divine medicines to Brother Chu in a few days. Wu Mo took the jade talismans and left after saying that. Chapter 2375. After Wu Mo left, Chu Fengmian lay on the bed and operated the sky-devouring secret skill to heal his injuries. Chu Fengmian's immortal crystal had only recovered 1% of its original amount. He had barely recovered, but he had to recover at least half of his immortal crystal if he wanted to fully recover his strength. Although Chu Fengmian's strength had recovered to the celestial realm, he would still be considered a figure in the extraterritorial starry sky. However, this was the celestial 9 regions, the mysterious northern region. Any sorcerer tribe member would become an immortal general or immortal marquis when they grew up. Chu Fengmian was still too weak. He had to recover at least 20 to 30% of his immortal crystal to reach the immortal king realm. Only then would he be able to stand firm. Chu Fengmian operated the sky-devouring secret skill to continuously devour the surrounding spiritual chi of heaven and earth. The spiritual chi of heaven and earth in the northern region was incomparably pure. In addition, Chu Fengmian sensed a wisp of chaotic aura in the spiritual chi of heaven and earth. Although this wisp of chaotic aura was extremely thin, it could speed up Chu Fengmian's recovery. Chu Fengmian operated the sky-devouring secret skill to devour spiritual chi of heaven and earth 100 times or even 1,000 times faster than others. Although the chaotic aura was extremely thin, Chu Fengmian still managed to get a lot of it. Chu Fengmian was originally worried that he would attract the attention of others if he operated the sky-devouring secret skill rashly. However, when Chu Fengmian's spiritual consciousness recovered, he discovered that the house he was in was a single house in the forest. It seemed that it was not Wu Mo's real residence, but a temporary residence he built in the forest. The sorcerer tribe had a tribal system. Most of the sorcerer tribe members would live in the tribe, but they would also build some houses outside for cultivation purposes. It was a good thing for Chu Fengmian that this place was far away from the sorcerer tribe. After Wu Mo left, there were no other living creatures nearby. Chu Fengmian operated the sky-devouring secret skill without any scruples. He activated the power of the sky-devouring secret skill to the extreme. Endless spiritual qi of heaven and earth poured into Chu Fengmian's body, turning into pure immortal power and merging with the immortal crystals. Chu Fengmian kept on devouring. After a whole night, Chu Fengmian's immortal crystals had recovered to about 100. This speed was already extremely shocking. After all, Chu Fengmian could recover about 100 immortal medicines by devouring one. The spiritual qi of heaven and earth he devoured in one night was sufficient to match the effects of a stalk of immortal medicine. If this spread out, it could be said to be world-shocking. However, Chu Fengmian was still not satisfied. If it was just absorbing the world's spiritual energy, Chu Fengmian would need at least 3 years to completely recover. Chu Fengmian didn't have the time to waste 3 years here. He still needed pills to speed up his recovery. Chu Fengmian glanced at the immortal blood grass and purple meridian grass beside him. He didn't devour these immortal herbs. It was too wasteful to devour them directly. Since Chu Fengmian had asked Wu Mo to search for other immortal herbs, he should be able to find some. When the time came, he could refine the immortal bloodgrass and purple veins grass into pills. The effects of the pills would be increased tenfold. In any case, Chu Fengmian should be safe for the time being with his status as a shaman. There was no hurry. A day passed by. During this time, Chu Fengmian had been lying on the bed with his eyes closed. He didn't move at all. He looked like a dead man. In fact, Chu Fengmian had focused all his attention on recovering from his injuries. He activated the power of the sky-devouring secret skill to the maximum and absorbed the world's spiritual energy to heal his injuries. It was only at dusk that Chu Fengmian slowly stopped the sky-devouring secret skill. He sensed that Wu Mo had arrived. Although the injuries on Chu Fengmian's physical body had yet to recover, his spiritual consciousness had fully recovered. His current spiritual consciousness was much stronger than that of a peak immortal monarch, realm martial artist, and demon immortal. Chu Fengmian sensed Wu Mo's arrival from afar and stopped. After a while, the wooden door of the house was pushed open and a huge figure walked in. It was Wu Mo. After chatting with Wu Mo for so long, Chu Fengmian had gotten used to talking to a 100-meter-tall giant. Wu Mo walked to the side of the bed and held a small pouch in his hand. It was called a small pouch, but compared to a giant like Wu Mo, it was actually about the height of 2 or 3 people. It looked bulging. Brother Chu, these are the immortal herbs that you asked for yesterday. Wu Mo placed the pouch on the bed. Chu Fengmian opened it and saw that it was filled with various immortal herbs and sacred herbs. They were the ones recorded in the Jade Talisman that Chu Fengmian gave to Wu Mo yesterday. There were hundreds of immortal herbs and sacred herbs, and they were piled up into a small mountain. So many, even Chu Fengmian was startled. Although those immortal medicines and sacred medicines were not extremely rare immortal medicines and sacred medicines, generally speaking, it was not easy to find a few in a day. Even if the northern region was suitable for the growth of immortal herbs, Chu Fengmian estimated that Wu Mo would only bring a few dozen of them. He didn't expect there to be so many. The northern region was more fertile and prosperous than Chu Fengmian expected. Brother Chu, we see a lot of these immortal herbs every day, but we don't know their uses. It didn't take long for us to find so many. Wu Mo smiled innocently. The sorcerer tribe was different from human warriors. Ordinary human warriors knew how to identify immortal herbs and sacred herbs. But for the sorcerer tribe, except for the sorcerer tribe, the other sorcerer tribe members knew nothing about this. They could only pick those that the sorcerer tribe members needed. Even if they came across some extremely precious immortal herbs, they probably wouldn't recognize them. They would only treat them as weeds and ignore them. If I have such a large amount of immortal herbs, it will be much easier for me to recover my strength. I can even improve my strength. Chu Fengmian was delighted. The northern region was so fertile that there must be more immortal herbs growing there. It was just that the sorcerer tribe members didn't recognize the other immortal herbs. If Chu Fengmian could walk around by himself, he would be able to reap a great harvest. But Chu Fengmian's strength was still too weak. The strength of a celestial realm warrior was only at the bottom in the northern region. Some wild beasts were more powerful than Chu Fengmian. According to Wu Mo, there were some wild beasts living in the depths of the forest. Chapter 2376. If Chu Fengmian went out rashly and encountered wild beasts, he would be courting death. He could only leave alone after he had recovered enough strength to protect himself. Before that, Chu Fengmian could not act rashly. "Brother Chu, are you planning to make medicine with so many divine herbs?" Wu Mo glanced at Chu Fengmian and asked in a low voice. Concocting medicine was a simple way of alchemy. By mixing a few immortal herbs together, it would have the effect of complementing each other. However, compared to refining pills using flames, the effects of concocting pills were much worse. In the 9 domains, only some low-level martial artists who couldn't control flames well and didn't have a suitable pill furnace would choose to concoct pills. Devour. In Wu Mo's Kunwa tribe, there was a witch apothecary who knew how to make medicine. He had watched from the side. When he saw Chu Fengmian take out so many divine herbs and put them together, he thought Chu Fengmian was going to make medicine. "No, I'm planning to refine pills." Chu Fengmian did not hide anything and said directly. He trusted Wu Mo a lot. Chu Fengmian could tell from their conversation over the past 2 days that Wu Mo was simple-minded and kind. Otherwise, he would not have saved Chu Fengmian and taken care of him, even if they were both from the sorcerer tribe. There were sorcerer tribe members who knew how to refine pills, so Chu Fengmian did not want to hide anything. Anyway, with so many divine herbs, Chu Fengmian could recover quickly. By then, he would not be afraid of any danger. Refining pills? "Brother Chu, you know how to refine pills?" Wu Mo was shocked when he heard Chu Fengmian's words. Refining pills was a method that only the best witch apothecaries knew. Usually, only the big tribes had alchemists who knew how to refine pills. An elixir pill was priceless in the entire northern region. Although Wu Mo had never seen an actual elixir pill, he had heard of it before. Naturally, he knew the identity of a witch apothecary who knew how to refine pills. Wu Mo did not expect Chu Fengmian, whom he had picked up out of kindness, to have such a background. Chu Fengmian's ability to refine pills was enough to make him a guest of honor in some big tribes. "Brother Chu, you must be from a big tribe." Wu Mo was shocked for a long time before he said that. He could tell that Chu Fengmian was still very young. In the sorcerer tribe, he could only be considered one of the youngest generation. However, he already knew how to refine pills. It was obvious that he had an extraordinary background. "I can't remember anything about that." Chu Fengmian rubbed his forehead and said. Of course, he knew that he wasn't from Shaman tribe. He was from one of the 9 regions. However, Chu Fengmian was not sure how the northern region sorcerer tribe would react when they met an outsider like Chu Fengmian. Therefore, Chu Fengmian had to be careful. "It's fine. When Brother Chu recovers a little, I'll bring you to Lord Priest to test your bloodline. We'll know Brother Chu's origin then." Wu Mo smiled and said. It wasn't a big deal that he couldn't remember. The sorcerer tribes were all gathered based on their bloodline. As long as they checked their bloodline, they would be able to find out where they came from. Therefore, even if they were lost, it was not a big deal. Bloodline test? Chu Fengmian was stunned when he heard that. He didn't know what bloodline he had. Chu Fengmian's sorcerer tribe bloodline came from the bronze heavenly demon skeleton. Chu Fengmian wasn't a real sorcerer tribe member. Therefore, Chu Fengmian was worried that he would be exposed during the bloodline test. However, it shouldn't be a problem for me to test my bloodline after I recover my strength. Chu Fengmian thought for a while and wasn't nervous. Anyway, he would test his bloodline after he recovered his strength. It wouldn't be a big deal, even if he made a mistake. Chu Fengmian's strength should have reached the peak immortal realm when he was at his peak. He was much stronger than the sorcerer warriors in the Kanwa tribe. Even if he made a mistake, Chu Fengmian had the ability to escape unscathed. Moreover, Chu Fengmian originally wanted to find out the origin of his sorcerer tribe bloodline. Moreover, this was the sorcerer tribe, so there must be a way to cultivate the immortal real body, which was the heavenly sorcerer real body. Chu Fengmian's previous advancements were all due to luck and countless resources. There was no technique to speak of. It could still be done when his strength was slightly weaker. However, once the immortal real body reached a higher level, the amount of resources required would be astronomical. At that time, he would have to rely on some techniques. If he could take this opportunity to integrate into the sorcerer tribe and obtain the cultivation method of the immortal real body, it would be a great improvement for Chu Fengmian. However, these were all for later. The most important thing now was to heal his injuries and recover his strength. There are a few immortal herbs here. If you come across them, you can help me find them. Chu Fengmian looked at Wu Mo and took out a jade talisman. There were dozens of immortal herbs recorded in this jade talisman. They were all extremely precious immortal herbs. These immortal herbs were used for healing and tempering the body. They could be used to heal Chu Fengmian's injuries. The northern region was so fertile and rich. Chu Fengmian wanted to try his luck and see if he could find some precious immortal herbs to refine some upper-grade immortal elixirs. Once refined, even if there was only one upper-grade immortal elixir, it could help Chu Fengmian recover a lot of his strength. All right, I'll send it to you tomorrow. Wu Mo nodded and took the jade talisman. He said a few more words to Chu Fengmian and left. After Wu Mo left, Chu Fengmian sat cross-legged on the bed and took out a medicinal cauldron. It was the heavenly nine-dragon cauldron. Chu Fengmian's mind moved and a flame started burning in the cauldron. Chu Fengmian picked up one of the immortal blood grasses and threw it into the cauldron. Under the roasting of the flame, the impurities in the immortal blood grasses were immediately removed and turned into a pure medicinal liquid. After refining the immortal blood grasses, Chu Fengmian picked up the second immortal herb and threw it into the cauldron. He repeated the same steps to refine the impurities and turn it into medicinal liquid. The third immortal blood grasses, the fourth immortal blood grasses. Each time, Chu Fengmian only threw one immortal herb into the cauldron to refine it. Chu Fengmian's medicine Dao was far more than this. His medicine Dao was enough for him to refine hundreds of immortal herbs at the same time. But now, Chu Fengmian's strength was so weak that he couldn't exert his full strength. The refinement of each immortal herb made Chu Fengmian suffer. Large beads of sweat dripped down Chu Fengmian's forehead. He felt somewhat powerless. Although the immortal blood pill Chu Fengmian wanted to refine was the most common lower-grade immortal elixir, it was still an immortal elixir. The refinement process was tedious, and it made the already weak Chu Fengmian even more powerless. Chapter 2377. Half an hour had passed. Chu Fengmian had refined all the immortal herbs needed to refine the immortal blood pill into a pure medicinal liquid. After finishing all this, Chu Fengmian was sweating profusely. He was seriously injured, and even mobilizing the flame was extremely difficult. After resting for a while, Chu Fengmian put all the medicinal liquid back into the divine nine-dragon cauldron. Under the roasting of the flame, the medicinal liquid began to condense into a mass of seven-colored medicinal liquid. All the medicinal properties of the medicinal liquid were perfectly integrated in it. Condense. Chu Fengmian saw the opportunity. With a move of his mind, a wave of spiritual energy enveloped the mass of medicinal liquid. Immediately, the mass of medicinal liquid was separated and condensed together, finally turning into seven-colored elixirs. Each of the elixirs was seven-colored. The moment the elixirs were formed, a pure medicinal power gushed out, making people feel comfortable all over. Judging from the medicinal power contained in it, it was worthy of being called an immortal pill. The immortal blood pill is done. Chu Fengmian's face was filled with joy. Although this cauldron of immortal blood pills was the most common immortal pill, Chu Fengmian still suffered a lot when refining it. Chu Fengmian still underestimated the immortal blood pill. After all, it was an immortal pill. Even if it was an immortal pill, it was not that easy to refine. Moreover, Chu Fengmian was seriously injured, causing him to almost lose control of the immortal blood pill several times. However, it was a daunting experience without any mishap. It was indeed a success. The appearance of the immortal blood pill was exactly the same as the one Chu Fengmian obtained from the medicine hall of the Supreme Sword Sect. It was a low-grade immortal pill. There were a total of 8 immortal blood pills in this cauldron. Compared to the usual cauldron of 10 pills, it was still a little less. However, Chu Fengmian refined fewer pills for the sake of stability. Let's try the effect of the immortal blood pill. Chu Fengmian picked up one of the immortal blood pills and put it into his mouth. At the same time, Chu Fengmian immediately operated the sky-devouring secret technique. The moment the immortal blood pill entered Chu Fengmian's mouth, it was shrouded by the sky-devouring secret technique and turned into an incomparably pure medicinal essence. It poured into Chu Fengmian's body and was immediately devoured by the immortal crystal. The immortal blood pill was a pill that purely healed injuries. Its medicinal power was extremely gentle, and almost instantly, it was completely devoured by the immortal crystals. Among them, more than 200 immortal crystals had absorbed enough medicinal power to reconstruct themselves and completely recover. There were also about 100 immortal crystals that had recovered by more than half. He just needed to swallow a little bit more medicinal power, and he would be able to fully recover. The medicinal power of this immortal blood pill was comparable to the medicinal power of 2 immortal blood grasses. A stalk of immortal blood grass, combined with some other immortal herbs, sage herbs, and so on, could directly refine about 10 immortal blood pills in one cauldron. It could be said that it could unleash 20 times the medicinal power of the immortal blood grass. Therefore, in the human world, no one would be so extravagant as to directly devour immortal medicines unless they had no other choice. However, in the northern region, in the sorcerer tribe, directly devouring immortal medicines was extremely common. After all, they did not have sorcerer alchemists who could refine immortal medicines into elixirs. Sorcerer alchemists who could refine elixirs could only be found in the large sorcerer tribe in the northern region. For example, in the Kunwa tribe, Wu Mo had never devoured an elixir since he was born. After a few minutes, after completely devouring and refining the medicinal power of the immortal blood pill, Chu Fengmian picked up another immortal blood pill and swallowed it. 8 immortal blood pills were immediately devoured by Chu Fengmian. In an instant, more than 1,000 immortal crystals on Chu Fengmian's body were restored, and his strength recovered by a lot. For any kind of elixir, the first pill was the most effective. Once too many pills were consumed, the effects would inevitably weaken. Therefore, the immortal blood pills that were consumed later were slightly less effective than the first pill. However, the immortal blood pill was not a medicine that was too resistant. Therefore, in a short period of time, the immortal blood pill should have a good effect on Chu Fengmian's recovery. After refining and devouring all 8 immortal blood pills, Chu Fengmian's complexion became much better. His strength had increased by 3 times compared to before. Although this amount of strength was far from 10% of Chu Fengmian's strength, when he was at his peak, Chu Fengmian was still very happy that he recovered so quickly. After knowing the effects of the immortal blood pills, Chu Fengmian immediately started refining the next batch of immortal blood pills after devouring all 8 of them. With the previous experience, refining the immortal blood pills this time was much easier than before. Moreover, with the recovery of Chu Fengmian's strength, the process of refining the pills was not as strenuous as before. This time, it only took 15 minutes for a new batch of immortal blood pills to come out of the furnace. This time, there were a total of 11 immortal blood pills, which was almost the same as the number of immortal blood pills that were refined by the alchemy masters in the records. Moreover, the quality of each immortal blood pill was much better than the first batch of immortal blood pills. When Chu Fengyan saw the immortal blood pills, he did not hesitate to put all of them into his mouth. He immediately activated the sky-devouring secret technique and devoured all of the medicinal efficacy of the immortal blood pills to heal his injuries. He refined, devoured, and refined the pills again and again. After a night, all of the immortal blood herbs and purple veins grass that Wu Mo gave to Chu Fengyan had been refined into pills. Only then did Chu Fengyan stop. Most of the immortal pills that he refined were directly devoured by Chu Fengyan after they were refined. Only a small portion was left. Chu Fengyan had devoured more than 100 immortal pills. As a result, he had recovered a lot of his strength. Out of the 129,600 immortal crystals in his body, about 8,000 of them had been restored. Although he had not recovered 1/10 of his strength, Chu Fengyan's current strength was completely different from before. Chu Fengyan's current strength was at least at the level of an immortal marquis. Although he was not an expert, he was comparable to an ordinary sorcerer tribe member. At least, he had the strength to protect himself. The effect of the immortal blood pills has weakened a lot. If I continue to devour them, they will be useless after I recover 1/10 of my strength. It seems like I have to find some other immortal herbs to refine them. Chu Fengyan thought to himself. It was obviously impossible to use the immortal blood pills to heal Chu Fengyan's near-death injuries. Chapter 2378. The stronger the martial artist, the harder it would be for them to recover from their injuries. For an ordinary celestial realm martial artist, one such immortal blood elixir was enough to directly restore them from a state of near death to the peak of their vitality. However, although Chu Fengyan had just entered the celestial realm, his true strength was even more terrifying than a peak immortal monarch. Therefore, the immortal blood pill alone was far from enough to heal his injuries. In order to fully recover, Chu Fengyan would need some middle or even upper-grade immortal pills. Chu Fengyan had mastered part of the Alchemy Kingdom's grand ceremony and the inheritance of the Upper Sword Sect's alchemy canon. He knew a lot of middle and upper-grade immortal pill recipes. However, pill recipes alone were useless. Immortal herbs were also needed to refine them. Chu Fengyan didn't know if he could find the herbs he needed in the northern region. The immortal herbs needed to refine middle and upper-grade immortal pills weren't as easy to find as the immortal bloodgrass. Many of them were hidden in the depths. It was very difficult to find them unless one was an alchemist with a deep understanding of alchemy. Even if Chu Fengyan told Wu Mo what he looked like, it would still be difficult to find them. Therefore, Chu Fengyan only asked Wu Mo to find some ordinary immortal herbs. Chu Fengyan had to personally search for such a precious elixir. However, before that, Chu Fengyan still needed to recover his strength so that he could have the strength to protect himself in this dangerous northern region. During the day, Chu Fengyan sat on his bed. His body had turned into a 10-meter-tall giant in the form of the bronze heavenly demon. Above Chu Fengyan's head, a huge vortex was frantically devouring the surrounding power of heaven and earth. Chu Fengyan had recovered some of his strength. When he transformed into the bronze heavenly demon, he was at his strongest state. Moreover, it was the easiest for him to heal his injuries. After all, this was the northern region. As a human, Chu Fengyan was an anomaly. His current form was the true appearance of the shaman tribe. When Chu Fengyan faced Wu Mo, he was always facing a giant that was dozens of times bigger than him. It was strange. When he turned into a bronze demon, he was not as big as Wu Mo, but he was still around 80 meters tall. He was only a little shorter than Wu Mo, so it was not strange. For the entire day, Chu Fengyan sat on his bed, absorbing the spiritual qi of heaven and earth to heal his injuries. It was not until dusk that Chu Fengyan sensed Wu Mo's arrival and stopped absorbing the spiritual qi of heaven and earth. "You are, Brother Chu?" The wooden door of the room opened, and Wu Mo walked in. When he saw Chu Fengyan sitting on the bed, his eyes flashed with surprise. But he quickly recognized Chu Fengyan's power. Wu Mo's face lit up as he spoke. You can already return to your original form? You can say that. I still have to thank you for those immortal medicines. Chu Fengyan nodded as his gaze fell on Wu Mo's waist. On Wu Mo's waist, there was also a small pouch similar to the one from yesterday. It was bulging and looked like it was filled with many immortal herbs. Wu Mo also saw Chu Fengyan's gaze. He took out the pouch with a smile and handed it to Chu Fengyan. This is according to the jade talisman you gave me. I found some immortal herbs. Many of the immortal herbs recorded in your jade talisman have never been seen before. Not only me, but also others. I can only find some that I have seen before. Thank you. Chu Fengyan took the pouch and said, You're welcome. Seeing that your injuries are recovering so quickly, you should be able to fully recover soon. Wu Mo looked at Chu Fengyan again and said with surprise in his eyes, As expected of a shaman apothecary, your recovery speed is too fast. Although the shaman tribe's recovery ability was stronger than that of humans and demon gods, it would take at least a few years for Chu Fengyan to recover from his injuries that were on the verge of death. But now, Chu Fengyan had recovered a lot in just a few days. Although he had not fully recovered, he was no longer as weak as before. Devour. Seeing that Chu Fengyan was recovering well, Wu Mo said with a smile on his face, What other immortal herbs do you need? I'll bring them to you tomorrow. Just follow the list of immortal herbs recorded in the jade talisman. Anything you can find will do. Chu Fengyan said. The immortal herbs recorded in the jade talisman were almost all the immortal and sacred herbs that Chu Fengyan knew of that could be used to refine immortal pills for healing and body tempering. Chu Fengyan did not expect to find immortal herbs that were too precious, but a few more inferior-grade immortal pills could help Chu Fengyan recover faster. All right, I'll bring them to you tomorrow. Brother Chu, you should rest first. After chatting for a while, Wu Mo prepared to leave, just like before. Wait. This time, Chu Fengyan stopped him. Before Wu Mo could speak, Chu Fengyan handed a pouch to Wu Mo. What's this? Wu Mo opened the pouch suspiciously. The moment he opened it, a pure medicinal fragrance wafted out of it. Herbs? Wu Mo was puzzled when he smelled the medicinal fragrance. He continued to look into the pouch. Suddenly, his expression changed, and he said with a trembling voice, Immortal pills? These are immortal pills? Wu Mo's voice was filled with disbelief. He hurriedly poured out a purple elixir that was the size of a longan fruit from the pouch and said in disbelief, Is this really an immortal pill? So many immortal pills? Although Wu Mo had heard of immortal pills, he had never seen them before. He had only seen them from afar when he went to some big tribes. He had never seen them up close. This time, he was really shocked when he saw the immortal pills. Immortal pills were extremely precious in the northern region, especially in the sorcerer tribe. They were priceless. Only sorcerer warriors were qualified to consume immortal pills to improve their strength. Moreover, even a sorcerer warrior had to save up for a long time before he could exchange for an immortal pill. An immortal pill was priceless. However, there were dozens of such purple immortal pills in the pouch that Chu Fengyan handed to him. He was completely shocked. He could not believe that he had so many immortal pills. These are purple veined pills, inferior-grade immortal pills. They have the effect of strengthening the body. They were refined from the purple vein grass that you brought me. Looking at Wu Mo's expression, Chu Fengyan said with a smile, These purple meridian pills are my gift to you. If you consume all of these purple meridian pills, you should be able to improve your physical body further. Wu Mo had been taking care of Chu Fengyan for the past few days. He had helped Chu Fengyan search for immortal pills. Chu Fengyan had always wanted to find an opportunity to repay him. Therefore, he kept some of the purple vein pills and gave them to Wu Mo. Chapter 2379. These immortal elixirs are too precious. Wu Mo was stunned for a moment before he said hurriedly, He knew the value of these immortal elixirs. One immortal elixir could be exchanged for a few or even dozens of immortal herbs. Although a few immortal herbs could be used to refine a cauldron of immortal elixirs, the value of immortal elixirs far exceeded that of immortal herbs. This was because sorcerer tribesmen like Wu Mo had already devoured a lot of immortal herbs when they were growing up. As a result, immortal herbs like the purple vein grass were of little use to him now. However, although the efficacy of the purple veined elixir was similar to that of the purple vein grass, there was still a slight difference. To him, it had a great ability to enhance his strength. In the northern region, where alchemists were extremely rare, one immortal elixir was hard to come by. Moreover, Chu Fumian had given him dozens of immortal elixirs this time. It's all right. You have helped me a lot today. These immortal elixirs are just a gift in return. Moreover, these immortal elixirs were refined from the immortal herbs that you gave me, so they're not mine. Chu Fumian said with a smile. But Wu Mo wanted to say something, but he was interrupted by Chu Fumian. We are of the same tribe. You are welcome. This was what Wu Mo said when Chu Fumian thanked him previously. This time, it was Chu Fumian who said it. We are of the same tribe. Hearing this, Wu Mo hesitated for a moment and did not say anything else. These immortal elixirs were of great use to him. He had been at the peak of the Immortal King realm for a long time and was only a step away from the Immortal Duke realm. Once he stepped into the Immortal Duke realm, he would become a true sorcerer warrior. His status would be completely different from now. A sorcerer warrior, no matter which sorcerer tribe he was in, would have a high status. On the other hand, there was a huge difference between sorcerer warriors and reserve sorcerer warriors. Only 1 out of 3 or 4 reserve sorcerer warriors could become a true sorcerer warrior. The Immortal Duke realm was a huge threshold for the sorcerer tribe. To Wu Mo, his cultivation was meaningless. Unless he could find some precious immortal herbs, it would be difficult for him to take another step forward and become a sorcerer warrior. However, if he relied on these immortal elixirs, he would have a higher chance of becoming a sorcerer warrior. In reserve, this was extremely attractive to Wu Mo brother Chu Fumian, if you need. Wu Mo looked at Chu Fumian and bowed solemnly. There's no need for that. Chu Fumian took a step forward and supported him. However, Wu Mo insisted on bowing. After bowing, Wu Mo took the purple meridian pills and left the room. After Wu Mo left, Chu Fumian turned around to check the pouch that Wu Mo had brought back. The pouch was bulging. Chu Fumian poured out all the immortal herbs inside. There were about 70 to 80 of them, and they were all different. However, in terms of effects, they were all immortal medicines that could strengthen the physical body and heal injuries. Profound energy fruit, absolute clarity grass, soul blood leaf. Chu Fumian silently recited the names of these immortal herbs. These immortal herbs were all recorded in the inheritance of the medicine hall of the Shang Sword sect. They were all immortal herbs that had excellent effects on tempering the body and healing injuries. However, most of these immortal medicines were low-grade immortal medicines and were relatively easy to find among immortal medicines. The immortal pills refined with them as the main ingredients would only be low-grade immortal pills, which are on the same level as the purple meridian pills and immortal blood pills. However, refining a cauldron of immortal pills required more than one main ingredient. There were also many supplementary ingredients. Chu Fumian roughly calculated that these immortal herbs should be enough to refine 5 different cauldrons of pills. As Chu Fumian examined the immortal medicines one by one, a pure white flower suddenly appeared in the depths of the cloth bag, and Chu Fumian began to examine it. The flower was pure white and pure, as if nothing in the world could taint it. It's a stainless flower? Chu Fumian's eyes flashed with astonishment. He originally thought that Wu Mo had brought back some low-grade immortal medicines. After all, middle-grade immortal medicines would generally have some devouring properties. They would instinctively know how to conceal themselves. If one didn't understand medicine, it would be very difficult to discover middle-grade immortal medicines. Therefore, to gather middle-grade immortal medicines, One would have to ask an alchemist who understood medicine personally. Who would have thought that Wu Mo would bring Chu Fengmian a stainless flower? The stainless flower was a middle-grade immortal medicine, and could even be considered to be of the highest quality among middle-grade immortal medicines. The dustless flower itself had the effect of tempering the body. It could temper the body and make it more perfect. As for the pure imperfection pellet refined from the pure imperfection flower, it was capable of activating another portion of the pure imperfection flower's power. This allowed the pure imperfection flower to not only temper one's physical body, but it was also capable of healing one's injuries. It could be said that the stainless pill refined from the stainless flower was the pill that Chu Fengmian needed the most right now. Wu Mo is indeed my lucky star. Chu Fengmian revealed a slight smile. Chu Fengmian wouldn't have been able to wake up so quickly if he hadn't met Wu Mo. Now, Wu Mo had brought him a stainless flower. If he could refine a stainless pill, Chu Fengmian's recovery would be much faster. Let's take a look at the ingredients needed to refine the stainless pill. Chu Fengmian wasn't in a hurry to rejoice. Instead, he hurriedly looked at the immortal medicines and searched for the other ingredients needed to refine the stainless pill. The stainless flower was a middle-grade immortal medicine. If he used it as the main ingredient, the stainless pill refined would be at least a low-grade immortal medicine. The stainless flower alone was useless for Chu Fengmian. He still needed to refine the stainless pill from it. Chu Fengmian searched for a while and found the other ingredients needed to refine the stainless pill. Originally, he could have refined 5 cauldrons of pills with these ingredients. But because he needed a portion of the immortal medicines to refine the stainless pill, he could only refine 3 cauldrons in total. However, for Chu Fengmian, refining a single cauldron of stainless pills was much more important than refining 5 or 10 cauldrons of low-grade immortal pills. Chu Fengmian sat cross-legged on the bed and took out the divine 9-dragon cauldron. Immediately, he poured a ball of flame into it, and it burned fiercely. Chu Fengmian picked up a few immortal medicines and threw them in. Before long, the first 2 cauldrons of low-grade immortal pills were successfully refined. The 2 cauldrons of low-grade immortal pills were the 6-purity pill and the soul blood pill. One was a body-tempering pill, while the other was a healing pill. Chu Fengmian's injuries were different from others. The source of his strength came from the 129,600 immortal crystals in his body. Body-tempering pills had the effect of restoring immortal crystals. Therefore, body-tempering pills could also be used to heal Chu Fengmian. Chapter 2380. After Chu Fengmian refined the 2 cauldrons of elixirs, he immediately swallowed them and refined them all in one go. These 2 cauldrons of inferior immortal elixirs restored about 2,000 immortal crystals in Chu Fengmian's body. However, these 2 cauldrons of inferior immortal elixirs were only a prelude to Chu Fengmian's breakthrough. The real deal was the stainless elixir. Chu Fengmian refined these 2 cauldrons of inferior immortal elixirs in order to restore some of his strength so that he would have more confidence in refining the stainless elixir. The stainless elixir was a medium-grade immortal elixir. Although it was only 1 word away from inferior immortal elixirs, the difficulty of refining the stainless elixir was definitely more than 10 times that of other inferior immortal elixirs. If Chu Fengmian was at his peak, he naturally wouldn't be afraid. However, his current strength was extremely weak, and he hadn't even recovered 10% of his strength. Even Chu Fengmian himself didn't have much confidence in refining the stainless elixir in such a state. However, if he could successfully refine the stainless elixir, the benefits it would bring to Chu Fengmian would definitely be enormous. It would definitely be of great help to his injuries. It was worth a try for Chu Fengmian. Chu Fengmian threw all the other auxiliary herbs for refining the stainless elixir into the heavenly 9-dragon cauldron and began to refine it. With the recovery of Chu Fengmian's strength, it was now much easier for him to refine medicinal liquids. These auxiliary herbs were quickly refined into the purest medicinal liquids by Chu Fengmian. Next was the highlight of the show, the stainless flower. The stainless flower contained an extremely pure elixir and was named stainless elixir. The impurities in it were extremely rare. It wasn't an easy task to refine the remaining impurities. The most difficult part of refining the stainless elixir was refining the stainless flower. Even famous alchemy grandmasters had less than a 30% success rate in refining the stainless flower. At least 3 void imperfection flowers were needed to successfully refine a ball of pure medicinal liquid. But now, Chu Fumian only had 1 void imperfection flower. To him, there was no second chance. Therefore, Chu Fumian was extremely serious. He even secretly activated the heaven-devouring secret technique. He borrowed the power of heaven devouring to refine the impurities in the stainless flower. The stainless flower fell into the heavenly 9-dragon cauldron and turned into a pool of elixir in the blink of an eye. Chu Fengyan controlled the pure yang heavenly fire to refine some impurities from the elixir from time to time. Time passed by minutes, and a full 2 hours had passed. This ball of medicinal liquid had already shrunk to 1/10 of its original size. During these 2 hours, Chu Fengyan was completely focused and didn't dare to be distracted in the slightest. He was afraid that he would be careless during the refinement process. Chu Fengyan breathed a sigh of relief as he smelled the medicinal fragrance coming from the medicinal liquid. The most difficult step of refining the stainless pill, the quenching of the medicinal liquid, was finally completed. Was stainless elixir was on it was. On it he had, was in the end. The next step was to condense the elixir. Chu Fengyan was already very familiar with this step. The elixir soon disappeared and divided into 3 elixirs the size of a longan. They came out of the heavenly 9-dragon cauldron. The 3 longan-sized pills were pure white in color, very similar to the color of the pure imperfection flower. They were the pure imperfection pills. Only 3 stainless elixirs could be refined in one cauldron. They were far inferior to the purple-veined elixir and immortal blood elixir, which could be refined in one cauldron. The higher the quality of the elixir, the fewer elixirs could be refined in one cauldron. The average number of mediocre elixirs in one cauldron was about 5. However, the stainless elixir was one of the best mediocre elixirs. It was close to the level of a prominent immortal elixir. Only 3 elixirs could be refined in one cauldron. Only 2 or 3 prominent immortal elixirs could be refined in one cauldron. Even supreme immortal elixirs could only be refined in one cauldron without exception. Of course, although the number of stainless elixirs refined was small, each one of them contained medicinal efficacy that was dozens of times greater than that of an inferior immortal elixir. It was comparable to the medicinal efficacy of 7 or 8 cauldrons of inferior immortal elixirs. Elixirs at the level of the stainless elixir were priceless even in the major sects of the 3 great sacred realms. It was difficult for ordinary immortal kings and immortal lords to obtain one. Chu Fengyan looked at the stainless elixirs and swallowed one of them without hesitation. No matter how good and valuable the stainless elixir was, it was more important for Chu Fengyan to recover from his injuries. The medicinal efficacy of the stainless elixir was extremely pure. Chu Fengyan didn't even need to activate the sky-devouring secret technique when it entered his mouth. Immediately, the immortal crystals frantically devoured the medicinal efficacy of the stainless elixir, reforming and condensing one after another. These immortal crystals that were reformed and condensed contained power that was even stronger than before. Although Chu Fengyan had a narrow escape from the pursuit of the immortal emperor and the bombardment of the Star Cave storm, it was also an experience for Chu Fengyan. There were very few geniuses who had truly endured such danger. The immortal crystals in his body had already begun to upgrade under the bombardment of the Star Cave storm, but they hadn't shown themselves due to the lack of power. Now that there was enough medicinal power to reconstruct these immortal crystals, The power of each of them was about 30% stronger than before. Chu Fengmian spent the whole day digesting the medicinal efficacy of the stainless elixir. In Chu Fengmian's body, there were 129,600 immortal crystals. More than 20,000 of them had recovered. The medicinal efficacy of this immaculate pill was much greater than that of all the low-grade immortal pills Chu Fengmian had consumed before. More than 20,000 immortal crystals were completely restored. Chu Fengmian also felt a surge of power that he hadn't felt in a long time. His current strength should have recovered about 10% of his peak strength. It was enough to fight against an ordinary immortal monarch. Chu Fengmian's strength had also skyrocketed after passing the Deva tribulation. When he finally fought with Prince Ling Jian, Chu Fengmian's strength had reached the peak of the immortal monarch realm, close to the immortal saint realm. 10% of his current strength was equivalent to the strength of an early-stage immortal monarch realm. In the sorcerer tribe, he could be considered a newly promoted sorcerer warrior. Finally, I have the strength to protect myself. Chu Fengmian stretched his body. Seeing this result, his face showed some joy. Chapter 2381. A sorcerer warrior was considered an important figure in the sorcerer tribe. Their status was much higher than ordinary sorcerer tribesmen. For example, Wu Mo was only a sorcerer warrior in reserve. He was considered to have some status in the Kuan Wu tribe. Chu Fengmian's current strength should be much stronger than Wu Mo's. After all, Chu Fengmian's strength had fully recovered to the level of an immortal lord. In addition, Chu Fengmian's combat experience was far superior to Wu Mo's. Even if they were in the same realm, Chu Fengmian was confident that he could defeat Wu Mo in 3 moves. Combat experience had to be accumulated through countless battles of life and death. Chu Fengmian had experienced countless battles of life and death. He had even fought with an immortal emperor. This kind of accumulation was not something a warrior of Chu Fengmian's realm could experience. Now that I've recovered my strength, it's time for me to take a look around. Chu Fengmian muttered to himself. He had been staying in the wooden house for the past few days. Now that he had recovered 10% of his strength, it was time for him to take a look around and look for other immortal herbs. Chu Fengmian had experienced the benefits of a medium-grade immortal pill from the stainless pill. It was much better than an inferior-grade immortal pill. The effect of an inferior-grade immortal pill was almost negligible to Chu Fengmian's current injuries. He still needed more medium-grade immortal pills to fully recover. The higher the grade of an immortal pill, the weaker the effect would be if it was taken continuously. The stainless pill was at the extreme of this. Once the second stainless pill was swallowed, it would only have less than 1% of the original medicinal efficacy. This little bit of medicinal efficacy was not too significant for Chu Fengmian. Therefore, Chu Fengmian kept the remaining 2 stainless pills to make other plans. In order to fully recover his strength, Chu Fengmian had to look for other medium-grade immortal herbs and refine other immortal pills. Immortal herbs above medium-grade immortal herbs had the ability to hide themselves. Those who had not learned medicine Dao would find it difficult to discover them, even if they encountered them. For Wu Mo to be able to pluck this dustless flower was already considered quite lucky. Among the immortal herbs that Wu Mo had brought to Chu Fengmian, this was the only medium-grade immortal herb. The fertile land of the northern region obviously had more than one middle-grade celestial elixir. The only possibility was that the other middle-grade celestial elixirs were hidden in Wu Mo and the others could not find them. Only Chu Fengmian could do that. Chu Fengmian looked out the window. It was almost dusk. Wu Mo had returned, as usual, with a sack in his hand. He pushed the door open and entered the house. When he saw Chu Fengmian, his eyes flashed with surprise. "Brother Chu, have you recovered?" Wu Mo's voice was filled with shock. Chu Fengmian's current aura could be said to be completely different from before. If Chu Fengmian was incomparably weak and on the verge of death before, the current Chu Fengmian's aura made him feel a huge pressure. To be able to bring about such pressure, Chu Fengmian's current strength was definitely not below his. One had to know that Chu Fengmian had just woken up a few days ago and was on the verge of death. However, Chu Fengmian had recovered in such a short time. This kind of speed was somewhat unimaginable to him. "I've recovered a little," Chu Fengmian said calmly. As soon as he said this, Wu Mo's face was filled with shock. Chu Fengmian's words meant that he had only recovered a part of his injuries and had not fully recovered. However, Wu Mo could feel that Chu Fengmian's strength was not below his at all. In fact, Chu Fengmian's strength was even stronger than his. This was only a part of Chu Fengmian's strength. Even Wu Mo now understood that Chu Fengmian, whom he had saved, was not an ordinary member of the sorcerer tribe. Just the fact that he was a sorcerer who knew the way of alchemy was already extremely shocking. Now, Chu Fengmian's true strength was at least that of sorcerer warrior. In fact, Chu Fengmian was not much older than him. Even in the history of the Kunwa tribe, there had never been such a person. Only those big sorcerer tribes could possibly have such a genius. You only took a small part of those purple vein pills? Chu Fengmian did not care that Wu Mo was still in shock. He sized Wu Mo up and asked. Wu Mo's strength seemed to be stronger than yesterday. Chu Fengmian knew that this was the effect of the purple vein pills. Although the purple vein pills were only inferior immortal pills, they were extremely effective for people like Wu Mo who had never refined pills before. Wu Mo's strength had been stuck at the peak of the Immortal King realm for a long time. The purple meridian pills that Chu Fengmian had given Wu Mo could help him step into the realm of Immortal Monarch and become a true wizard warrior. However, it seemed that Wu Mo's strength had increased, but he had not completely broken through. With Chu Fengmian's understanding of the way of medicine, it was naturally impossible that he had given too few purple vein pills. The only possibility was that Wu Mo had not swallowed all of the purple vein pills. Hearing Chu Fengmian's words, Wu Mo's face immediately became nervous. He only spoke after a while. "I've distributed the purple vein pills to a few of my tribe members. Brother Chu, it doesn't matter. Consider the purple vein pills as a gift from me. It doesn't matter who you want to distribute them to." Chu Fengmian smiled and interrupted Wu Mo. Chu Fengmian knew Wu Mo's character very well. He did not care much about his own interests. Otherwise, he would not have given him so many immortal pills for free. Since Chu Fengmian had given Wu Mo so many purple vein pills, he had immediately distributed some of them to the other sorcerer tribesmen. This kind of character was almost impossible to find among the martialists. Every man for himself. Among the martialists, it was common to abandon one's wife, children, and brothers for a little bit of benefit. Chu Fengmian was a little surprised that Wu Mo existed among the sorcerer tribe. With this kind of character, if Wu Mo was a human, he would have been schemed to death. However, as a friend, Chu Fengmian liked this kind of character. "This pill is for you. You can refine it now." Chu Fengmian looked at Wu Mo suddenly. His palm moved, and a pure white pill flew toward Wu Mo. It was a stainless pill. Chu Fengmian could only swallow one of the stainless pills. He had no use for the remaining two pills, so he might as well give one to Wu Mo to help him. Chapter 2382. This is Wu Mo hesitated when he saw the elixir that Chu Fengmian handed over. Although he was not knowledgeable, he could tell that the elixir was extraordinary. The efficacy of the elixir was vastly different from the elixir that Chu Fengmian had given him. It was definitely a priceless item. "It's all thanks to your help that I was able to recover. This elixir is nothing." Chu Fengmian smiled when he saw Wu Mo's hesitation. "Moreover, I have lost my memory. I will need your help in the future." Hearing this, Wu Mo hesitated for a long time before he nodded and took the stainless elixir. To Wu Mo, the temptation of becoming a wizard warrior was irresistible. He had been cultivating diligently so that he could become a real wizard warrior one day. "Refine it now. I can protect you from the side," Chu Fengmian said. Wu Mo did not hesitate. He immediately went into the room and sat on the bed. He swallowed the stainless elixir. Immediately, a surge of pure efficacy flowed into Wu Mo's body. The main ingredient for refining the immaculate pill, the immaculate flower, was an immortal medicine with incomparably pure medicinal energy. Now that the immaculate pill had been refined into a spirit pill, even a mortal could directly swallow it. It was difficult for warriors and demon gods to not be able to withstand the efficacy of the stainless elixir. Moreover, Wu Mo was from the wizard tribe. The body of the wizard tribe was naturally stronger than that of human warriors and even demon gods. Most of the impact of the elixir was nothing to the wizard tribe. Therefore, most of the wizard tribe could withstand the efficacy of the immortal herb, even if they did not understand the way of medicine. As the medicinal power poured into Wu Mo's body, Chu Fengmian could clearly see jade-green crystals emerging from Wu Mo's body. These were immortal crystals. There were a total of 129,600 immortal crystals in Wu Mo's body. This was the heavenly wizard real body, which was also the original body of a wizard tribe member. The 129,600 immortal crystals were continuously devouring the medicinal power of the immaculate pill. Wu Mo's aura was constantly rising. Wu Mo's realm had been stuck at the peak of the immortal king realm. He was stuck at the threshold of the immortal duke realm. Now, with the help of the medicinal efficacy of the stainless pill, this threshold was easily crossed. The stainless pill was a mediocre grade celestial pill that was infinitely close to a prominent grade celestial pill. With its medicinal efficacy, it would be a piece of cake for Wu Mo to make a breakthrough. Wu Mo was able to reach the peak of the immortal king realm by himself, without the help of any immortal elixirs. His aptitude was considered pretty good in the sorcerer tribe. With the help of the stainless pill, he instantly broke through the barrier of the immortal king realm and stepped into the immortal monarch realm, becoming a true wizard warrior. After becoming a celestial duke, Wu Mo's strength continued to rise. In the end, Wu Mo's strength increased by 30% before it finally stopped. This kind of increase in strength was not just because of the stainless pill. Although the stainless pill was miraculous, it could only help Wu Mo break through the barrier of the high immortal realm and enter the high immortal realm. However, the increase in strength after breaking through to the immortal lord realm was closely related to Wu Mo's previous accumulation. Previously, Wu Mo had been accumulating this strength in preparation to break through to the high immortal realm and become a true wizard warrior. However, as he had not made a breakthrough, this strength had been accumulating. The stainless elixir had helped Wu Mo to break through. It had also released this energy, accumulating it for a long time. Now, Wu Mo's strength was even stronger than those sorcerer tribesmen who had just stepped into the high immortal realm. Me? I made a breakthrough? After the medicinal efficacy of the stainless pill was completely dissolved, Wu Mo woke up and felt the strength in his body. He exclaimed in surprise. He did not expect that he would be able to break through to the high immortal realm, which he had been struggling to reach, with the help of the stainless pill. He felt that his current strength was completely different from before. It had increased by a few times, and he had become a true wizard warrior. The high immortal realm was a huge threshold in the sorcerer tribe. Only those who had stepped into the high immortal realm could become wizard warriors. In the Kunwa tribe, where Wu Mo was from, there were only 3 wizard warriors, and they were all elders of the previous generation. There was not a single true wizard warrior among the younger generation. Wu Mo was now the newest wizard warrior of the Kunwa tribe. He could already imagine the shock he would receive when he returned to the tribe. He had once asked an old wizard warrior in the Kunwa tribe when he would be able to make a breakthrough. That old wizard warrior told him that he would have to train hard for at least 10 years before he could make a breakthrough. However, this elixir had saved Wu Mo 10 years of hard work. As a wizard warrior at such a young age, Wu Mo's future achievements might be even greater. He might even become a wizard general. Thank you, Brother Chu. Wu Mo turned around and bowed deeply to Chu Fengmian. In the sorcerer tribe, this kind of etiquette was only given to those who had saved their lives. However, Chu Fengmian had helped Wu Mo to step into the high immortal realm. To Wu Mo, it was tantamount to giving him a new lease of life. Chu Fengmian stood at the side and looked at the happy Wu Mo with a smile on his face. Wu Mo was still not satisfied with his punches and kicks in the house. He rushed out of the house and faced a giant tree. He clenched his fist and punched it hard. The giant tree, which was a few hundred feet tall, was knocked down by Wu Mo's punches. The more Wu Mo felt the power, the happier he was. With his current strength, he could definitely become a true wizard warrior. I want to go to the forest nearby to test my strength with some ferocious beasts. Brother Chu, you are? After hitting a few giant trees, Wu Mo was still not satisfied. He felt that there was an inexhaustible energy in his body, and he wanted to have a good fight. I'll go with you. Anyway, my injuries have recovered a little, Chu Fengmian said when he heard Wu Mo's words. Chu Fengmian also wanted to walk around and look for some immortal herbs. However, the northern region was a completely unfamiliar place for Chu Fengmian. It might be dangerous for Chu Fengmian to walk around alone. The northern region was a part of the ancient Barrens continent. There were some hidden forbidden places that even celestial sages and immortal sovereigns did not dare to step into. There were a few places in the Kunwa tribe that were listed as forbidden places. If Chu Fengmian walked around alone, he might accidentally step into those places. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.